What's up, people? Look who I'm here with. And my good friends, John and Kevin Suhr. This is fun.
Like you don't see enough of us.
Like I don't see enough. I don't see any of you these days. Nobody sees anybody these days. So, guys, first, I don't see any of you these days. Nobody sees anybody. Oops, I got the stream up in YouTube, and I need to turn down the. I gotta turn off the audio there, or I get a delay. Okay, there, I got it sorted out. So, guys, first of all, I just want to say thanks for being here, and this is going to be great. And if anybody's watching, just so you know, last couple of weeks at about the hour mark, every time for whatever reason, stream goes dead, and I don't know why. And then I sign back on. If you're a regular watcher, you've seen me do that. So if that happens, I'll start it again, but just give me a couple minutes and you'll see it pop up again in YouTube. I don't know why it happens, but it's probably, there's just issues. Everybody's dealing with streaming issues these days, I guess, because everybody's online and streaming and stuff like that. So it's just been part of it. But and if there's any issues on your end with it gets jittery or whatever, just try and reload your browser window, and that should probably solve the problem. Okay, so you guys need no introduction. My good friends from Suhr. John's a legend. Kevin's his brilliant son. And we wanted to do this. We sort of formed this idea last week sometime because there's so many questions that people have all the time about the guitars, the amplifiers, building things in the U.S., building things, why don't we do things overseas, right? Why do you do your amps with PC boards? All these kinds of questions, things like that. I thought, let's just do a live stream. We'll just address it all. People can ask questions. We'll come up with some kind of, some questions from some of the folks at Suhr said, why don't you ask this? Why don't you ask that? And so I've got a list of those here. And we can just address all kinds of stuff, and it'll be fun. Ray Potter says, "'Cause America." Right, John?
That is a good point.
Yeah. So if we get started, why don't we just get started with like the real broad one, like why build in the USA?
How about why not?
That's good. I like that.
I mean, it's. I think that the USA has been hurting in the manufacturing industry, as we all know, and I just like making my own stuff. So if I was to take parts and offshore them, it kind of takes all the fun away from it, from seeing things get born. It's kind of like having a baby but never seeing the baby. We like to be in total control of what we do because of our pretty extensive warranties and customer support. So how else can you do that unless you're in full control? I mean, yeah. I go back to the days when I was making the 3+ preamp with Bob Bradshaw. The first, I would say, 100 pieces, Bob and I soldered ourselves and built them. And if we ever had a failure, it was extremely rare. I'd say 99% of them just worked because Bob and I both knew what was supposed to be in there. Whereas when we started jobbing things out to an outside shop, even in California, about 30% of them didn't work.
Is that right?
So, yeah. So those are things that, you spend all your time fixing things somebody else did, when it's a lot nicer just to be able to have full control and do it yourself. And just like with the guitars, if I see something today that I don't like and that I know can be fixed, I walk out to the shop and I fix it. So, I have the CNC guys say, move this location or move this part, or don't use that wood anymore. I can stop it immediately instead of being stuck with 200 pieces of whatever that come from somewhere else, even if it's in the U.S. If it comes from the U.S. or if it comes from Asia, I'm kind of hosed. And then you've got a financial issue where you're like, what do I do now? Do I use this even though I don't fully believe this product is 100%? Is there some way I can make it work? I mean, it's like, I hate all that, so anything I can possibly make myself, I will do.
And that comes from experience and learning the hard way and going, screw it, I want to have control, right?
Yeah. And if I lived in another country, I would do it the same way. I mean, if I lived in Japan, I would still say, I'm going to make everything here that I have full control over.
Yeah. And I've personally walked around the shop with you and seen you go out on the floor, and you'll stop at where somebody's doing something. You'll say, something will catch your eye, and you'll be like, a little bit more like this, like you need to take it, and you're constant. That quality control is like when you're walking around, you do that 24/7 without even noticing that you're doing it anymore. But it's just right.
I'm sure my son can attest to the fact I'm a bit OCD when it comes to things being right. And I can have a messy closet, but if I go up and look at the wall in a room and it's not straight, it just bugs the crap out of me. It just makes me nuts if something's not straight, or it's, oh yeah, guys don't like it when I just kind of walk around the shop and point from across the room. Is there a weird reflection in that guitar?
Yeah, but that's what you do, and it's awesome. I mean, because I love that, you're in the office when we're in there working on something or whatever, somebody will bring a guitar in to show you, and you'll look at it and go like, want me to tell you what's wrong with it? No, that's our.
That happened to me the other day, actually. I brought like one of the Epiphones I just got a while ago into the shop, and he was gonna kind of clean it up and dress up the frets and stuff. And right away he just looked at it and he found like this crack near the nut. So I hadn't even noticed since I got the thing. I was like, I didn't know that was there. But he found it in like 1 second. It's like, holy shit.
Yeah, but and with your own guitars, when somebody brings something in, you'll look at it, go, we need to look at this or address this, like a little, take it back and do, Suhr, I always say, is like not a big company, but it's not a small company, and it's this beautiful kind of mid-sized thing where John's got still like he's there on top of everything all the time. It seems like, or as much as you can be. There's somebody up in the super chat up there. It's Leon Barron. He's somewhere in Europe, and he wants to know. He's got a question about the. Well, first of all, he says, "John and Kevin, your gear has changed my gigging life." And
that's why we do what we do.
Yeah,
we're frustrated guitar players.
And he says, "Could you share tips on how you use the Hedgehog, especially the gain channel? Because it's not even really a channel, is it? It's like an overdrive circuit, right? So maybe you can help with."
Yeah, it's an additional circuit that gets popped in there, and it is in all. I really don't hide the fact that it's extremely Dumble inspired. So that is a hot rubber monkey design. I think it's closest to, I think, what they call a Blues Master. And, but with some tweaks, because the thing I never liked about Dumbles is that, Dumble's a brilliant guy, but the amps are tuned for the player and the guitar. And I've seen a lot of them, and I've never seen two that are identical. So the quirky part about the amp is that it's so tuned into the guitar and the player that if a different player or you use a different guitar, the amp can sound great with humbuckers and horrible with single coils, or vice versa. So you really do have to kind of understand that all those little switches, for instance, like the gain boost and the mid boost, are all in the EQ section, and the EQ section comes before that overdrive section. So that overdrive section is added in there. It's kind of like having a Fender amp and then you slap an overdrive in there before you hit the output section. Before you hit the output section. In that overdrive section, there is what Dumble calls a hot rubber monkey. It's an internal tone stack. So I don't think anybody should go in there unless they really know what they're doing, because we spent a lot of time trying to make the amp sound great with different cabinets and different guitars. So, but that option is in there, and it's pretty obvious what the controls do if you want to go in there and tweak the overdrive. But the main thing about the overdrive, I think you have to do, is you need to run the effects loop, unless you're going to play it at a healthy volume. If you're going to play it stage volume, then it doesn't matter. But if you're trying to play at low volumes, I advise always putting in the effects loop, which is not in a Dumble. A Dumble doesn't have an effects loop. So I advise always putting in the effects loop, because it buffers that final master control, and use the return level as your final master control to get everything down to a more reasonable value. So I want you to take the master on the front of the overdrive section and get it up around 5. So that'll be a happy place for it, and then adjust your effects loop return, even if you're not using effects, as your final master. that'll make that master on the overdrive channel really get sweet and saturated. And also those front switches, I always turn them on when I use the overdrive. And that's the other nice thing, is that with a real Dumble, you can't, you really wind up setting them up for one sound. And so with this, I just felt that was really, frustrating. So all the buttons are programmable, so you can turn off the bright when you go to the lead channel. So I'll typically turn off the bright when I go to the lead channel, but I'll put on the boost and I'll put on the mid boost, because I like a shit ton of gain. I'm just, I'm an 80s guy. So that, and just remember that your first gain, everything in the front affects that overdrive section. It's like a pre-EQ. So, and the post EQ is the internal tone stack that's hidden from you. My vote in the beginning was to put that on the outside of the amp, maybe on the back of the amp, but other people, I have to listen to other people sometimes when I design things, and they thought that'd be too confusing for most people. But
good to know, though. That's great. And to know that to run the level on the overdrive circuit on 5 and then switch the master in and use that as your overall, because I haven't tried that, so I got to do it.
Use the loop all the time, unless you're playing it at reasonable stage volumes. Then it's not such an issue. You just want the amp to breathe a little bit. What this does is it basically buffers the return volume for the EQ is better buffered than the master on the level on the individual channel. I can't even remember what I call a master level, whatever. Both same thing, volume, but it's not a gain volume.
Derek Chapman's up there. There's a whole bunch of questions that we got now. Actually, the first thing I want to say is Miguel saying MIDI reactive load. That's Kevin's department.
Yeah.
So maybe just before, and we can come back to that in a second here, but just before it disappears, I want to get Derek's question in here, and we can talk about MIDI reactive load. Maybe is that something we consider? But Derek says, I bought a PT15 and 212 cab this week. Thank you, Derek. Appreciate that. But not a Suhr guitar. My guitar is used in attributes and needs to be a Strat. So I wondered if John has ever had any thoughts about licensing the Strat headstock.
No. I don't think the headstock makes the guitar sound like a Strat. So all I'm doing is advertising Fender at that point. And plus the fact that when the lawsuit was going on, those were options from Fender, but they were extremely expensive. And I don't think that he would like to see the upcharge that it would translate to.
Just cost more money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good to know. So Kevin, what about MIDI reactive load? Is that because you've been super up on, like, in the last year or two, on you getting all your MIDI chops together, and now you've got it mastered, right? And
yeah,
is that something that you'd ever want to do?
Yeah, at some point. There's probably a few other things I would like to wait until I can improve as well, but I don't know when that would be. I've got quite a few projects in the works right now, and one or two of them might have MIDI on it. So, but it's not the reactive load yet. So maybe it's in the radar for sure. Sure. But I don't know when that would come out yet. It's not one of my current projects. I've got a few things going right now, but I think I would like to wait for some other things before I get there. That's awesome to know. And but that it's all these things are possibilities and can be considered, right? Yeah, Gochi's up in the top chat as well. And by the way, guys, there's about 575 people online, so that's awesome. Happy Sunday to everybody. How you all doing? Gochi says, hey guys, I'd like to know if there's any ombre head coming. That's a good question.
I think it's safe to say yes.
We'll
definitely do a head. Funny enough, because, and it should be coming out fairly shortly. It's a no-brainer, and that amp, the beauty of that amp is the way it sounds in the other cabinets. The original that I own came with a JBL, and I haven't even listened to that speaker because I'm just not expecting to like it. Maybe I'll like it for that. Maybe some early Gibbons stuff. Maybe he did use a JBL, but this seemed to be a factory stock upgrade, which was interesting. But
That's interesting.
the first thing I did is plugged it into my 4x12 with greenbacks, and I was just in heaven.
Well, it's hard to get past, right? Because you can plug, once you plug it into a good 412, it's like, oh, it's just,
yeah. And you know, my 4x12 is, I've got a Marshall cab, and I've also got a custom audio cab, and the custom audio cab just always sounds right to me. Yeah. It's just a real solid built, more modern 4x12.
Yeah.
No rattles, no buzzes, and I've got
nice
four green. Yeah, I've got 4 greenbacks in there. A G12, they're Chinese G12Ms, which I think are great speakers. And you're right. Everything I plug into there sounds great. And we actually use my cabinet as the reactive load curve as well.
That's what you modeled the impulse.
Yeah.
Or the
curve, I design everything with that cabinet, and then I go backwards. Then I try to design a smaller cabinet that sounds as good.
Mm-hmm. Now, so tell us, actually, for those out there that maybe don't know the origins of the Ombre amp, because it's like you've got a personal connection with that tone, and that amp is just kind of a special amp it's modeled on that wasn't like Brown Deluxe, right? It's kind of an oddball.
No, it is a Brown Deluxe. Yeah, it's the rumor is that that's what Billy Gibbons used on the first 3 ZZ Top records, or used it on a lot of it. And most people who know me know that's where I kind of live. Is a lot of that 70s and 80s music. Probably my age pushes me there, but the thing I love about that music is it was more about the way the guy played. It was about the instrument, and it was about the amp, and everything is one unit. And the artist kind of had this individuality in his tone, and it's something, unfortunately, I don't know if it's because of production or if it's because we have too many toys to play with, but it just seems to me that those guys back then had so few things to give them their tone that they pulled it from everywhere they could, from their guitar, from their pickups, from the amps, and just cranking little amps and getting them to be in the zone, you know, so to speak. I also discovered that I just absolutely love 6v6s. I think that they're just the perfect marriage in between a Fender type tone and a Marshall type tone. And you can really get just about anything you want out of them, and at a reasonable volume. So I think they're really glorious sounding. But yeah, the Brown Deluxe was really, I have a supplier who had a stroke, unfortunately. Really nice guy. He sells the machine that I make to prototype PC boards in-house. Mm-hmm. So it's a wonderful little CNC that I can cut PC boards. That's another thing we do inside in the shop. It's like if Kevin and I we've got an idea, we want to do a special little buffer. Well, we can punch one out in an afternoon. We don't need to wait for PC boards. We cut everything in-house. So that's like bringing everything in-house and having the ability not to wait for other people and depend on other people, especially these days, is where I like to live. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that as people try to avoid offshoring product. You know.
Well, you just brought up 2 great things that I actually want to touch on, because it was one of the questions that Suhr actually, the folks at the company forwarded to me, not you, but the folks at the company actually forwarded to me to ask.
Well, why don't they just ask me?
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, but I guess they figure everybody else could benefit from the answer. So one of the ones, there's Peter Lasis is up in the top chat, and I'm going to get to his question in just a second. He has a question.
Hey, Peter.
He's a good guy, right? We know him. He's got a question about will there ever be a Suhr attenuator. So we'll come back to that in just a second, Peter. But so I wanted to, just because you touched on it, the 6v6s as one of your favorite output tubes, because we did that, of course, in the PT15.
And the Jim Kelly too.
And Jim Kelly before that, and the 4 6v6s in a Kelly, which is a great sound too. Yeah. So yeah, the question was basically like why 6v6s and how they compare to EL34s. My feel is that at least in my amp, I feel like when you crank them, they kind of have a bit of a 34 quality, but down low, they have a bit more of that Fendery quality. And so there's this beautiful best of both worlds kind of thing.
Yeah, they're very nice at adapting, whereas something like an EL34, it tends to deliver a little more mid-range. And I say deliver because the tube actually really doesn't have a tone. It's more the impedances and how it reacts with the transformer and everything that give you what you're hearing. and also how it reacts with the output transformer secondary, whatever you're using as a load. So they are kind of nice that way, in that a Kelly sounds entirely different than a PT15. And that's kind of the beauty of them, is that you're not pigeonholed into, like a 6L6 can be a little bit bloated for overdrive. So, I think that the 66s are they got great mid-range, a sweet top end. It's just, it's a good thing.
Yeah. And then I want to touch, we'll come back to this actually, because we got a bunch of questions in the top chat, but I do want to touch on PCBs, because you mentioned PCBs, making them in-house, and also that you did some unique things, I know, on the Ombre and also on my amp with the different PCBs. And I want to get into a whole PCBs, why you do them, because there's this whole, hand wired versus PCB thing and all that. So let's touch on that in a second, but I'm going to get to a few of these other, because there's all these folks asking questions in the, let's
that's
ask
a whole nother thread.
Yeah, well, we can touch on it in a sec. Carl wants to know, like, what would be your pickup choice? What's, just real quick, like, your pickup choice in a hum single, John? Like,
personally,
yeah, like a good balance.
I tend to go for the extremes. I either like your signature pickups, or I like an SSH Plus, which is our hottest pickup.
Okay.
Actually, the Aldridge is the hottest pickup. So I'll usually use the SSH Plus, and I tend to like the cleanest humbucker in the neck I can find, which again would be yours, or the SSV, but yours is still cleaner than the SSV. And you showed me a lot of that, which opened my eyes as to, I've never been a neck pickup guy. Back when I made one of my main guitars I played for 10 years back in New York, it was a solid quilt maple body. It had a bridge pickup and a middle pickup and no neck pickup. So I eventually added a neck pickup, and it kind of ruined it. It was just so cool just having the bridge pickup and the middle pickup, and I get all my funk tones and everything I needed. But when you and I started talking about the Thornbuckers, and you explained the importance of the clarity of the neck pickup, it kind of made me fall in love with the neck pickup again, a neck humbucker again. Because usually neck humbuckers are too woolly, and they have that, maybe it's desirable, the woman tone, but I never liked the woman tone. I like to hear some high end. So it's really, when that neck pickup starts to sound almost like a Strat neck pickup, then I start to really like it. And I think that's where your humbucker goes. So the fact that the neck pickup is under the strings in an area where there's a lot more vibration, the strings are moving a lot more over that neck pickup than they do over the bridge pickup. That's why the neck pickup is going to be a lot louder than the bridge pickup. So using a very weak neck pickup is usually going to balance just great with a hot bridge pickup.
And in a hum single, like if you had either the Thornbucker Plus or HSS Plus or something at the bridge, those you were saying were your two favorite in the bridge. What about two singles then? What would your favorites be out of your line?
To me, my what I put in every guitar I own is the V60 LP. I am not, when I worked at Rudy's, I don't know if Rudy's listening, but when I worked at Rudy's, I'm OCD. If it's the same thing as when, it's kind of funny, a parallel story is when Steve Ferris, Mr. Mister, who's a phenomenal guitar player, and I don't even know if he's playing anymore, but he came into Bob Bradshaw's shop when I was there, and he wanted me to retube one of his Fender amps. And one of the first questions he said was, how many sets of 6L6s do you have? And Bradshaw behind him was going, because he knew that Steve was going to say, I want to hear every set. So I was that way. So I just told Steve, I got 3 sets. And he goes, okay, I want to hear them all. So I was that way at Rudy's, where, we're always on this constant search. What the guitar is going to inspire you to practice and want to play more, which in turn is going to make you be better guitar player, but it's not going to fix any issues you've got in your playing. But we all still will search for that ultimate pedal, that ultimate amp, that ultimate pickup that is going to make me sound like Eddie Van Halen or Richie Blackmore or Billy Gibbons. So when I was at Rudy's, I would go through absolutely every Duncan there was. We were the largest Duncan dealer there was, and we were also a DiMarzio dealer. So, and this was back in the early 80s. And this is when Duncan had like a little, 1-inch ad in the back of a guitar magazine. So I would listen to every possible pickup I could and just recirculate them. So Rudy go, why are these leads an inch short? Oh, I don't know. but I do think that it gave me a tremendous insight to talking to my customers, because I really knew what each pickup sounded like and the differences in what kind of guitar. So I kind of really got used to what works for me quickly. I can tell very quickly now if something works for me. And the V60 LP has that right amount of mids to it that makes it more pleasing with overdrive pedals and with overdrive in an amp. Because as we all know,
oh, sorry, I was just going to say, you called it greasy mids to me once, and I was like, oh, that sounds good.
Yeah,
that was a word.
Yeah,
I was like, I want that.
Yeah, it's like smoky. I mean, well, one thing that we probably don't publicize enough is that we use a magnet that really nobody else has. As far as I know, Fender used to use it in the early 60s, and they started playing around with it again just shortly after I left, which I think is probably in the late 90s. So when I was at Fender, Mike Landau asked me to make him a set of pickups. I was a senior master builder, and I was also doing electronics. And I hand wound these pickups on one of the old machines that we had in the shop that was in the prototype area, and he didn't like it. And I was just dumbfounded. I was like, well, it's got the right amount of turns. And he goes, well, don't get me wrong. It's real close. It's real good, but it doesn't sound like my 61 or my 63. I can't remember what year it was, but it was the early 60s. I think it was a Lake Placid Blues he had. But so he goes, it just doesn't sound like it's that old pickup. So I turned around, and the wonderful thing about working at Fender in that position is I could really call anybody and get immediate attention. So I called the magnet company who was currently supplying Fender magnets, and I started picking one of the engineers' brains to find out, because I should backtrack a little bit. After I made that Fender pickup with the Fender magnets that he didn't care for, he sent me another pickup that was dead, one of his old pickups. And so I rewound that one and sent it back to him. I did it the same way, same wire, same everything. And he loved it. He was like, that's great. And I said, okay, so it's not the winding that's the issue. It's something else. What's left? The dimensions were all the same. So the only thing left was the magnet. So I just, what are you laughing about, Kevin? Kevin's probably heard this story 100 times.
No, it's not only that. It's someone in the comments like, Kevin looks super thrilled to be here. And then Justin started texting me, I'm dying laughing at this comment. And I'm like, stop. He's making me laugh.
I'm sure we'll get to Kevin.
No, I just couldn't hold it. It was too, sorry.
But so how did you... So you're like, okay, it must be the magnets, and then you're like, huh? And then did you track down the manufacturer?
So I called one of the senior engineers at this company who was like 60 something, and he was ready to retire, but he happened to have been there in the 60s, and so he might have been 80 for all I know, but he was an old guy, and he was like, yeah, I'm ready to retire, and he goes. So, but he was really interested, and plus the fact that I was at Fender, so their goal was to do whatever Fender wanted. We were probably a big chunk of their business. So he had this habit of every time he would do a run of magnets, he would put a date on it and throw them on the shelf, just because he always wanted to have a reference in case something went wrong, somebody complained, at least he could have the original to go back and test.
Okay.
So he actually went to his shelf and he pulled some magnets off from the 60s. And he goes, yeah, I've got some samples here. He goes, send me in so Mike Landau let me send him some magnets from the pickup that I rewound after I rewound it. And so I sent them to them, and they said, yeah, okay, these are different. And wow. He knew exactly why. And he remembered his conversation with Leo about why they made the change. So and I asked him, I said, could this affect the way it sounds? Because, isn't it just about magnetism? And he goes, no, there's HC and BR, which are two specs related to holding power. I mean, I'm not a magnet expert, so I take as much information as I need to get the job done. But he explained to me at the time that, yeah, it might change the way they hang on, you know, just the field that's flowing around them. And the way he described it to me just instantly made it sound to me like it was like, you know, smokier, greasier. It's like it's got more give to it. It's not so strong. It's not as strong as the current magnet. The reason they did it was hysterical. The reason they did it is because they used to cut the magnets. Obviously, the rods need to get cut, and the magnet would chip on the corners. So they would have to go through, and you have to. There's no easy way to do this. You have to go through and spin the magnet on a grinder or a sander while you're spinning it to bevel the corner, because magnet's extremely hard to cut or sand or file. So you've got to deburr, you've got to knock the chips off of every magnet. And that's the reason that those magnets had a chamfer on them. It wasn't because, you know, the bevel on the top, it wasn't to make it go into the fiber easier or anything else. It was because it was a cosmetic issue. They were trying to get rid of the chips. So Leo went back to the magnet company and said, you got to stop this. I can't be spending all this time. It takes me more time to get rid of the chips than it does to load the magnets and build the pickup. So they changed the cooling process of the magnets as they made them. And that became what we call an Alnico 5 Special. And that's what we use on everything, except for actually your Alnico 4, which is in your bridge pickup. We use this Alnico 5 Special because it's the way magnets were made before Leo asked them to change it. They had to, you know, get rid of the chips. But that in turn, it changed something else on them. So unfortunately, I pay about 10 times more for my magnets than any other pickup supplier out there. But I'm scared to change because, and you know, relatively, it's not an extreme cost. And I'm scared to change them because I just like the way they sound. And also, I put those magnets in, made them for Mike Landau, and he loved them. He says, that's it.
That's the coolest.
So, you know, and that's why he was happy to do signature pickups when I went out on my own.
I love the connection of talking to the guy, and the guy remembered talking to Leo about it, and you got to the bottom. See, this is what I love, is it's science. There's answers behind all this stuff, right? That's what I love about. Okay, so this is a great thing about Suhr, is that John always said, like, okay, the guitars back in the day, they didn't have magic trees back then, right? Even though there was probably more wood supply and stuff like that than there is these days.
They might have some older wood.
Yeah. But your want to get to the kind of the bottom of all of this stuff, like, okay, vintage guitar better? Like, no, they're not just better. Like, it's like if there's something about it, you can figure out what it is that
there's a reason.
We got so many questions here, and I'm writing all you guys that have done the top chat, everybody that's been up there. I'm writing them all down here so I don't miss any of you as best I can here. If I do, I'm really sorry, but I'm trying, because we got about 750 people online, which is awesome. Good to have you all here. So it was Peter that had the question about an attenuator or like tube reamp or something, like, you know, reactive load, but or either that or a passive attenuator. Would there ever be a Suhr attenuator would that be something that you want to do? And maybe Kevin can address that too, because he's so quiet. I don't know.
Attenuator.
Well, I don't know if Kevin doesn't really play around with attenuators. We like to. I think we kind of believe more in the slaving, or it's not technically reamp, but it is reamp, you know, where you take a reactive load and then the potential of running it into a power amp to amplify it again. But, you know, our goal, I think, though, would be is to make sure that we have amplifiers that don't need that. Unfortunately, there are amps like that are glorious to play through, like the Plexi amp, or you know, things like that you don't want to go in and put gain circuitry. But on new product, we would rather have you not need to use an attenuator. The master should work just great.
I think Peter's like wondering maybe if he's got like a Plexi or something, old Marshall or something. Would you ever consider making a? Because the reactive load's been so popular.
I just think that using a reactive load and an amplifier is a better way to go. And unless you're only looking to knock off 3 dB, you can actually use our reactive load as an attenuator to knock off 3 dB just by using it as a parallel speaker you don't hear. So I mean, the best attenuator would be to have like a bunch of reactive loads and hook them all up in series barrel or whatever impedance you need, because those act like speakers. But we also have our hearing hears things differently at different volumes, and you've got a lot more control when you reamp. I mean, when you make an attenuator, they always sound squishy to me.
Me too.
I've never heard one. I think the Kelly one is one of the best ones I ever used over the years. I also like the Faustine, and I still have the Faustine if anyone wants to buy it. But they, even when I had my Kelly attenuator with my Kelly amplifier, I would just wind up unplugging it eventually and going, now there it is. Now I hear the directness and the response that I'm looking for. I think with an attenuator, you're paying a lot of money to get it close.
Yeah, agreed. Would this be something you would ever consider? Not that it's in the pipeline or something, but like a reactive load with power amp built in. Would that be something? I think that's what he's asking. Like, would that be something you would ever?
Well, I'll let Kevin answer that.
I mean, we're always open to tons of ideas. I haven't played with any attenuators personally, and it's never been something that's been like my focus or like I need to do that right now. But I know a lot of people like it or want that. So I mean, but at the moment, yeah, I'm just working on other things. I can only do so much in 1 year. So
I think that's the thing, right? Is you guys have a lot going on, and when there's a couple projects on the go already, then it's like all these other things. It's like, because once again, it's not a big company, but it's not a small company. So it's like you're looking at a big part of the R&D team right here, right?
No, yeah, we are the R&D team.
We are the R&D team.
we have much more people doing production, but in terms of design, it's just us.
Yeah.
And I do have one other person, Seiki, who helps me. A lot of times I'll do 3D models and then I'll send them to Seiki, and he used to work at Fender, and he's a very big help. He helps me do bill of materials and costs, and I'll send him a chassis and then he'll make sure it can be manufactured. So he'll help me there. But in terms of the design of the circuitry, any programming and things like that, it's just us. So
yeah.
I wish I could pause time and work on all these things and release like 10 things in 1 year maybe, but it's kind of like we have to slice what we got for that year, and then any other ideas might have to come next year or so and so. So
one thing we've just battered, like this is just guys talking about gear, not some future product or anything, but you never know what things could become. But I know you've talked about trying and done a little bit of research into trying to figure out what makes tubes tick and why solid state has been maybe not like if it's possible to build solid state that has all the characteristics of tube, that old thing again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to me it'd be like amazing to have like there's some products out there now that I like that are load reamp kind of units, but with tube power amps, because there's that tube feel where you're still connected to the speaker, and that's part of what I think makes them cool. But could that be done in a solid state thing is actually kind of quite interesting to me, because adding more, as a road guy, as a touring guy and stuff, adding more tubes to my rig is just more, it's like if I could have it lighter and less heat and less weight and all that, and have it, so.
Yeah, I've been playing a lot with that stuff right now.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at it, and this is kind of segues to maybe something you can talk about later. But the funny thing is that Pete and I both really sometimes love to figure out what a famous artist really did, and what was really. Like I spent so much of my life buying amplifiers that an artist would use, not realizing that he was doing 10 other things that were key. And if you didn't do those 10 other things, that amp wouldn't sound like that. Like Brian May, it's got to be a non-top boost. It's got to be a treble booster. It's got to be the pickups in series and phase switches to throw one out of phase. So Pete and I, he knows where I'm going with this. So Pete and I also really like King's X and Ty Tabor. And I think Pete even did some interviews with a bass player or something. You played with some stuff with him, right?
Well, I did quite a while ago. I did an interview with Doug. He came here to my studio actually, and we did which was amazing. And I got to play Dogman with him, and it was such a thrill. But so that was awesome. But then a few weeks ago, I did the interview with Ty as well. So now I've talked to two of them.
So Pete and I went out and both bought Lab L5. We both bought Lab amps, the L5.
There's mine right there.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that when Pete before he bought it, he goes, "Do you know this Lab L5?" And I'm like, they sound like garbage. I hate those amps, And I said that because when I was in the club band back in the 70s and 80s, I owned one, and But I was the guy that used to bring a different amp to every gig. And I used to drive my sound guy crazy because one day it was a Vox, and the next day it was a Marshall, and the next day it was a Lab, and the next day it was a Gallion Kruger. But I did actually play solid state amps a lot during my club band days. And it's kind of like what you do to it. But the thing about solid state power amps is that they are a very low output impedance, so they don't interact with the speaker, and they sound different. Now we're playing around with ways of getting around that and making them behave a little bit more like a tube amp, because I do agree with you. If we could possibly do it with solid state and avoid the tube, then we're all ears. I own I've got a Kemper right there. I've got a Helix over there. Kevin and I both have Stomps. Kevin's got an Axe-FX. I've got one too. We don't, people like to think I'm really opinionated about tubes. And to me, it's just a challenge. Whereas right now, I think tubes sound better. But that doesn't mean that there's not room to make everything else sound great and use it for your work. But, to me, I don't gig out anymore. So it's about the satisfaction and enjoyment of playing the instrument. So I don't care how hard it is to move around. I don't care about any of that. I just want to enjoy myself. And
but
so
I think sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to say just to back up kind of what you're saying is like you're a guy about moving things forward, which is what I've always loved about you. It doesn't have to, like, for instance, I know you won't compromise on the size of an output transformer in a PT15 or, it's like, no, we're using the bigger ones because those small rinky dink ones don't sound as good yet. Right. So
that's the reason they sound small. Mm-hmm. It's not the tubes, it's the transformers. Right.
And if they did sound as good, then you'd be fine with using them, right? I mean,
and that's what happened with the 15. Yeah. When Pete and I did the PT15, it actually was going to be like a hot rodded Corso. We were going to do a Corso on steroids with a high gain channel and that kind of thing. Other things happened, and but that power section kind of stuck in my mind. And I talked to Pete, and Pete and I both talked about how good it sounded. We were like, geez, this thing sounds amazing. For 15 watts, you're really not losing anything.
Well, you over-engineered it in such a way that the original, John built this little, the channel 2 of the PT100 into this little bread box looking amp, right? With the power section. This is going way back to 2014 with this 15 watt 6v6 power amp you wanted to try. And I was like, this thing sounds unbelievable. Like it was, so that was the genesis of the.
Yeah, that was the beginning of that amp. But so I think it could be done with solid state. We're still working on it. Kevin's into the digital world too, and he's playing around with a lot of cool stuff.
Just a lot of R&D right now. This is a phase of simultaneously working on some cool projects and simultaneously doing a lot of R&D for possible new products. So
Kevin's kind of like getting into the deep study of the harmonics that we hear when we hear distortion and why we like what we like, and can we manipulate those harmonics without in like one pedal? Can you make it change from this to that, just by
pretty cool.
Like we say, there's a reason things sound the way they do, and I don't necessarily think you need to have tubes, but right now they just do it better. So we're trying to figure out if there's other possibilities.
It's like tubes is the goal, and then everything else is trying to meet that goal of the tube sound, Unless you got a very specific solid state jazz chorus thing or something that wasn't tube to begin with. But in general, it's like we're trying to meet that standard of the tube sound. So sometimes it takes a lot of extra work to get there.
Definitely.
They just behave differently.
I have to say the one funny thing about the L5 story, because I got mine and you got yours. So you're like, what? Those amps sound terrible or whatever. And within 24 hours, you'd bought one.
Yeah.
So John still got the bug, just like we all do, right? We bought two of the only ones that were on Reverb, and so we're still geeks.
Yeah, I had to hide that one at work.
Yeah. Interesting thing about them are where you get in trouble.
Hopefully my wife's not listening.
Setting them the certain way is like, that's the other thing that Ty sort of reiterated is like, there's only like 2 settings on it where it sounds good and everything else is terrible. And so I went online and found the settings, I was like, oh yeah, there it is. It sounds pretty great.
Yeah. Treble on 10, really? You see, back in the day, I probably hated that amp because you had to put the treble on 10, but now I don't care. If it works on 10, that's where it works.
If it works on 10, it works. Yeah. So a couple other, we should grab some of these other ones for folks that were up in the top chat and stuff here. Chelsea Constable, who's an amazing guitar player, and she has an Aura, and she went and picked up that guitar from the store, didn't she? And she
didn't even ask me, Chelsea. But that makes me happy that she liked it that much that she just went out and got it.
Absolutely. And there's another fellow as well named Flipper, and they were both asking the same question, which was, would the Aura ever have a chance of becoming a production model? Is that something that, in some shape or form?
I have some other ideas. It's not going to, the style is not going to go away, but it probably is safe to say that the people who own those first 100 own something that's going to be collectible for a while. Plus the fact that you can tell by the bags under my eyes that I'm fretting and leveling the fingerboards and doing a lot of this work myself. And then I've got Juan, my painter, who's been with me forever. He actually has an Aura coming to him because he's been with us for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
He came from Jackson before he worked for me.
Wow. Yeah.
And so it's only he, Kenny Jin, and Kenny Jin was a master builder at Fender, and he was my first employee. So he's been with me for over 20 years too. Kenny is doing the final build on him. So it's really just, and there's Trevor too, who's also from Fender, and Trevor is my production manager for guitars. And Trevor does all the wood, takes care of all the wood, the binding, all that stuff. Then it comes to me. I do all the fingerboard leveling, the fretwork. I do that understring tension, which is something that we could talk about if anybody ever wants to. There's a major difference in the way that I fret these guitars over most traditional set neck guitars. And but yeah, it's a labor of love. So if that specific guitar ever gets into production, it might be a little while. Those people who have those guitars have some collectibles for a bit, but there's going to be guitars along that lines, along the lines of that guitar, but no, not that exact guitar. We don't plan on putting that in production anytime real soon, which is also nice for the people who bought them. They know they've got something that's, you're not going to see your guitar come out for half the price. That isn't going to happen.
I love that. I mean, it totally makes sense. So, Chelsea said she'd like to do a video with me sometime too. I'd love to do something with you sometime, Chelsea. That'd be awesome.
And
David,
thanks, Chelsea, for doing barbecue. So I told Chelsea, say, what would you like me to do on the guitar? And I said, I love barbecue by ZZ Top. She did a great job. So check it out if you haven't.
She's an awesome guitar player. Yeah, check out her channel and all her social medias. David has a question. He was up there in the super chat about new basses, like could a 5 happen or a P, those types of things down the road. Can't give away everything, right? But is that a possibility? That he's nodding. Yeah, sure.
It's a definite possibility.
I'd love to see a P. I mean, that's my favorite bass, so I'd love to see that at some point. What about is there ever been, because there was talk over the years about a Doug head, Aldrich? Was that ever something that
I love Doug to death. Doug and I go way back, and the only thing is that Doug has a very specific guitar that he likes, and it's not an Aura. So in the beginning, Doug was
he was asking about amps though, John.
Oh, I'm sorry. Doug, as far as amps, we're always talking about it. Doug likes what he likes. It's the same thing with the guitars. Doug's got his Les Pauls that are real heavy tanks, and they're big, thick guitars, and he just likes that. Actually, funny enough, Doug's amp mods I've been doing back since I first moved to California in the early '90s, and Doug has always told me that the amps I did for him is what you hear on the Dio Live. It's what he always used live. He used other amps in the studio, but he always used those amps that I modded for him. But recently, since Doug has been playing, with his new bands, and it's he doesn't want as much gain anymore. So he had me redo one of the originals. He's got more than one. He had me redo one of the original amps I did for him to give it less gain, and he's been really liking that. So and I think he's even been playing around with an SL67 or an SL68 because he's getting a little bit more into that vintage world of. I think he's using more pedals these days, whereas back in the earlier days, it was like nobody used pedals because most pedals didn't sound very good at all. So, but he's getting into the more, vintage gear, so he doesn't want as much gain in the preamp. And so he's just changing a little bit, and we talk all the time about doing something, but it's kind of like what you say, I'd like to devote some time to it. But Doug is pretty happy with what he's got, and I think he just loves to just play.
Yeah, he's always.
Yeah, he doesn't change gear very much, and and since I already mentioned on it, that's kind of what happened with the Aura is that he really wanted me to make a guitar like the Les Paul, and that a Les Paul price, and it just wasn't in the cards for this guitar. This guitar is kind of more something that I wanted to do, and so if I work with Doug on a guitar. We'll work on that later, and the amps too. But Doug and I are dear friends, and he's always been a great supporter too.
Terry Goldstein just mentioned, he said the loop, because we were talking about attenuation earlier, and Terry said the loop level control in the PT100 is the best attenuation I could have. And I agree. Well, one thing John's really great at is making, the tone in these amps is largely generated in the preamp. So, and that's something that got better over it used to be you had to crank the snot out of an amp to get amazing tone, and the best amps with high gain still retain some you can design it into the preamp, I feel like, to some level, the tone generation, and then attenuate it using the good old master volume if you do it right. Does that make sense? Because I feel like you're great at that.
Who, me?
Yeah, making it still sound like an old, like a PT100 does a pretty cool old plexi tone, for example, but it can get it at a lower volume, I feel like, whereas that wasn't always
when the one thing people have to remember when you're using attenuators and you're using reamplification systems, whatever they might be, where you're loading the amp and reamplifying it into a power amp. I don't technically call that an attenuator. To me, an attenuator is passive and uses resistive or capacitive networks to reduce your volume. But it's where were we going with this?
Oh, I was just saying that it got better over the years at making the amps with master volumes, right? You're really good at making an amp with a master sound pretty authentically like a cranked plexi.
It's out of necessity, and also the beauty of doing it that way is the biggest fail spot on a tube amp is usually the output section, the power tubes, the output transformer, doing bad things to them, playing them too loud. Some of them weren't designed to play that loud. So if you can get your overdrive and your basic tone in the preamp, you pretty much have created an extremely reliable amp that sounds like it's blowing up if you want. Right. So that is a lot better place to be than to crank your output section into a reactive load like Van Halen style. I mean, an SL68 into the reactive load on full steam is just glorious, but don't think you're not burning tubes and burning parts in that amp, because it's like, when you take your car to the track, you're not getting anywhere, but you're putting some damage on there.
Well, and even the way you implement the master on the SL68 is great. Like I was mentioning the other day, because you were talking about somebody popping fuses with certain tubes on an SL68 at high power cranked into an attenuator. And I was like, I don't understand why they're not just turning the post-phase inverter master down to like 7, because the amp retains 95% of the tone when you do that. The masters implement it so well.
I think because they can, you know, and
Right.
that's my first piece of advice to people when you use a load or an attenuator like that is don't play the amp any differently than you would through a speaker cabinet.
Right.
And if you're not getting enough gain, don't turn it up louder, you know, boost the front end or something, you know, because once you clip that output section, you're just wearing it out.
Yeah, and it's easy to do at low volume through headphones with the, you know, PT-15 is no different, right? Although you designed the PT-15 to run pretty cool even when it's cranking, right?
That amp runs extremely safe.
With that in mind.
Yeah, I'm not trying to get a lot of wattage out of the twos. I could get more than 15. I mean, even a deluxe is about 20. So you can get more out of there, but I just chose to stay safe.
And probably because you knew people were going to use it because it's got the load built in.
Absolutely.
Right.
If there's 10, somebody's going to use it. I try to design most of my masters to be good at 5. You know, once you go past 5, I don't know why. I mean, I guess I should say I'll design it so 10 is the max I want you to use. But I think we're all used to JCM 800s and everything where you had to put the master on 2. You know, and they were still loud. So to me, 5 is good, but I don't really expect people to push masters much past 5.
Right.
Unless you've got the gain on 1, you know.
I think Bruce Egnator's here. We got to say hi.
Hey, Bruce.
Yeah.
You know, I love Bruce. Bruce turned me on to a program called Eagle back in the day, and I always remember and thought that was such a kind gesture because he actually gave me his library. I said, well, how do I create library parts for the PC board layout? And he goes, you know what? He goes, just take mine. I'll never forget how nice the guy was for a competitor.
He's a very, very nice guy. And I've always I wanted to go out and do his amp building course in Michigan and build an amp. Because I know, let's go. Let's all go.
I'll just heckle him.
Are you sure you want to do it?
I really love to do it though, because then I'll come back and then I'll be like, hey, now I know what's going on when you guys start talking all these capacitors and resistors.
Yeah, as long as we both tell you the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. You'll be like, oh God, Pete thinks he knows what he's talking about with amps now. This is a nightmare.
Should have never taken that class.
Okay, so I gotta ask.
I think that kind of segues into, someone asked, how do we prototype on a breadboard or CAD and circuit boards?
Oh yeah, good question.
I think we do both. Well, I do both. I do breadboard and CAD and circuit boards. We cut circuit boards in the shop. We have a mill machine that we cut copper boards on, and we can make prototypes.
We can give them a plug. The company is called MITS. They're called MITS. It's a Japanese company, but I've had this machine. It's a $30,000 machine that I've had for probably 10 years, and I think I've replaced the motor on it. But pretty much anything that we can draw on CAD, we can turn around and spit out a double-sided board. Pete, you've seen them. I mean, they look like real boards. I mean, I flow coat them with solder, so it kind of looks like a Soldano amp when I'm done. But I can do them double-sided. I can put little eyelets in there, and so that's my preference, because you don't want to breadboard tube stuff. Kevin will breadboard all the time, and it's kind of funny sometimes when you see his desk. It's like, really, that works?
When working on pedals and things, right?
It's this rat's nest.
It's crazy.
So tell us a little bit about, let's talk about that for a second, because I want to address it. When somebody, there's an old, common knowledge, point to point's the way to go, all that stuff, versus PC board. Just have at it. Like when it comes to, I'd love to know what's the difference between the PC boards you use and your design, and then overall what you think about PC board construction, and getting into things like mounting tubes on PC boards and whether that's a bad thing or a good thing, or mounting pots on PC boards and whether that's a bad or a good thing in amps. Tell us your thoughts.
That might be a whole show. You sure you want to get into?
Well, let's spend like 10 minutes on it, because it's just like, it's such a topic where it's like, oh, I point to point's better. It's like, which just isn't the case. It's implementation, right? I mean,
100%. It's 100% implementation. The beautiful thing about PC boards is that they're repeatable. I spent, when I was at Bradshaw's, I spent a lot of time doing repairs on amps. And it could be anything from a Boogie to a Marshall. It was usually the people that he was doing rigs for. So he would say, hey, here's Tommy Skioch from Tesla. He wants 3 Marshalls, all modded different, and he wants them all with a good effects loop so I can integrate them into the rig. So then Tommy would have he would have wet, dry, wet. He would have maybe he didn't do wet, dry, wet, but he had 3 preamp channels from the 3 Marshalls I modded. He also had a 3+ preamp, so he basically had 6 channels. And then his rig returned into 2 of the Marshall power amps. So you kind of have to get into this whole thing about everything works together. So my whole thing about doing, all these amps, I've been exposed to a lot of PC board versus point-to-point versus hand-wired, and I've had to work on them. Obviously, I worked on Ed's amp. You know, it's the things that go wrong are not PC boards. They're usually wires. I've seen hand-wired amps that have a capacitor, point-to-point amps that have a capacitor soldered straight to the volume pot. And what breaks? The wire going to the capacitor. I mean, you don't want things to be floating in the air where a chassis twists and they can snap a wire. I fixed amplifiers that I had to move. Somebody had a hand-wired amp, and I had to move a wire 1/4 of an inch to stop an oscillation. I mean, those are things that should not be left open to interpretation. Or if you take a beautiful amp, just because it looks pretty doesn't mean it's well thought out and made. I mean, neatness is very important, and I don't think anybody could criticize the inside of our SL68 or SL67, which are 100% hand-wired. They're absolutely meticulous. The guys that are doing that, they're like jewelers. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But you still have to know which wire you're putting next to which wire. Otherwise, you can create a mess and oscillations. And I'm sure Kevin will attest to the thing that we always fight in audio are ground loops and grounds.
Right.
Yeah. Noise and oscillations.
Yeah, noise, oscillations.
Usually not too many oscillations, but
it's never the circuit that gives us trouble. It's the environment, it's the enclosure, it's RF, it's the things that we want to make sure that you don't have an issue. I mean, you know, case in point, back in the 90s when I had my Bradshaw rig, every time I walk across the carpet, I'd go plug my cord into the front of the rig, and I would blow out the input capacitor from the static of the carpet. I mean, those are the kind of things that you really need to make sure don't happen. And,
right.
and as it turned out, I learned there was a way to protect that circuit. But when I called Bradshaw, he goes, "Well, I don't have that problem here." I'm like, "Yeah, but you're not in New York with this humidity and all these heaters and the cold and carpets everywhere." And so you know,
with the way
it's repeatability.
So with the way you built the PT15, because there was this, and I want to address a couple of these things, because there was this review that this fella did over in the UK where he kind of got inside and took it apart and he's looking at it and stuff like that.
Before he played it.
But there's a lot of speculation where people that don't know what they're looking at look at it and go, "Oh, it's PC board amp," you know what? And there was a couple comments that, you know, quite frankly pissed me off, because it's like people look at go, this is an $800 amp. There's no reason they can't sell. It's like, dude, first of all, I mean, some of the things that that drive me nuts is just like the things Kevin had to go through for. I mean, Kevin worked on so one of the things you're paying for when you get an amp like that is R&D. Kevin worked for a year on the R&D of getting the reactive load miniaturized, first of all, and repeatable, and to nail the tone and the spec of the original reactive load, but make it fit inside an amp, and then make that work with an IR board that's digital electronics, all next to high voltage tube electronics, and then getting it all on separate, easily serviceable boards inside an amplifier. I mean, there's so much going on. So maybe you can just address some of that. You know,
yeah,
the way the
designing that thing was like a little nightmare. It was I was routing that board for months, and it's not just one board. There's 1, 2, 3, I think at least 3 or 4 boards in there.
Yeah.
And there's the headphone board, there's the control board, and then there's the main board, there's a power board, and then there's the reactive load IR board. So there's 5 boards in there. I had to figure out, okay, we have this limited size, small chassis, and we got to place everything in a logical order where it's not going to interfere with each other. You got the power transformer, the output transformer, high voltages going everywhere. So it took me a lot of thought to map it out. It's like trying to create a city. You're trying to create a city, and you don't want the playground next to the plumbing and blah blah blah. So
great analogy.
Creating it. It's like, how am I going to make this work? It seemed like a pipe dream at first. And I was like, I'm just going to keep trudging through. And after a few months, I just kept routing every day. I was just routing traces and programming and getting everything working. How can I make it so that we can build it at like some reasonable speed?
And serviceability, right? Because when you mentioned the city, I think about the favelas in Brazil or something like that, where houses are built all on top, and that could be a lot of amps, right? Like built like, or you could build it like a city that's logically laid out. If there's maintenance and service that needs to be done, that was all taken into account, right?
That's why we did a separate power board in case something happens to your power tubes. We could easily service and pull out that power board and replace that.
So that specifically,
it hasn't happened yet, but we did
that's
it anyway.
The thing. Specifically, let's address, like, you did a separate power board, and there's is that where the tubes are mounted and sockets there, right?
Well, that's where the power tubes are mounted. So the idea for that is preamp tubes. I have never ever had a problem. If you have a problem with a preamp tube mounted to a PC board, it's because you did something wrong, or because you're using a shitty socket. If you're using a good quality, like Belton style, a Belton socket in there. I built the 3+ preamps back, started building those in 1991. And to this day, I have never heard of anybody ever needing a preamp tube socket replaced in that preamp. And the beauty of it is that all the components are right next to the tube. So instead of having a wire fly from a PC board to a tube socket, the parts are right on top of that tube socket. So it's very short signal path. But when it comes to power tubes, like Kevin's saying, is you could have a catastrophic failure and it could arc the PC board or things like that. So I would not personally put power tubes on the same board as the preamp tubes, because the preamp tubes I've got absolutely no worry about. I have never, the only time I've ever replaced a preamp tube socket on a PC mount board is when it was a shitty socket.
Right.
There's something wrong with the socket, physically wrong with it, and then you had to replace it, but it's not something that happens on the road. So, but the power tube, it could arc. And so we did that power tube board. So we can actually, it's just a little board, just holds it holds the phase inverter and the two power tubes, and you just pop it right in. There's like 6 wires, and
it's very easy to repair. Super easy to repair.
In fact, Kevin and I actually redid that board multiple times because there was something I didn't like in the signal. And so I rerouted a board that I thought was better than another board, and it turned out, but the beauty is that I was able to cut it on our own machine and get back the result the same day. So awesome. I would go, let me try this. Oh, actually that wasn't better. This other way is better. So, that's the drag about a PC board amp, is that in the design phase, if you don't have a PC board router, or you don't have if you're not a PC board guy, which I think is usually what it is, but if you're not that kind of person, or you don't have the equipment to make quick prototypes, it's tempting to let something go that isn't quite right. I've seen Marshall produce boards on certain era JCM's master volume models that are not well designed. And it was the era when they started putting the pots on the PC board.
Right.
But that's just a coincidence. But everything was on the same PC board, and their tone stack was too close to the phase inverter, so the signal will actually jump around the tone stack straight into the phase inverter, and that's the reason the EQ didn't work so well on those side-by-side master volume model Marshalls.
So once again, it's implementation. It's just
100% integration. Plus, we do. That guy said, "Oh, they don't use a hand soldered board." Well, funny enough, we do. Even though our boards are PCB, we do hand solder every component. Yeah. Kevin actually developed some great tools for the people assembling them, where it points to the part, where it tells you where it is, where it's going to go, which really reduces people
on an iPad, right? It's great. It's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you've got literally this core
manual pick and place.
Yeah. I mean, you said to me you could build it with this, and I was like, no.
Yeah. You could sit here and you could go through each image, and it'll show you exactly what value and where to place it. And
yeah,
I could stuff a board in like under 10 minutes. I can't remember. I think I did it in 5 minutes.
It doesn't mean we can
by
build
using
it in 10 minutes.
It doesn't mean we can build it that quick, but we could at least stuff that one board that quick. So,
right.
So, but and also our PC boards, most of, at least on our amplifiers, all of our PC boards come from a military manufacturer out here in California. They're made here. We do all the stuffing in-house. We prefer, again, to have total control over that.
Right.
So
okay.
It's like, you know, if you've ever, if any techs out there have had, and I'm sure Bruce can say, what would you rather do? Would you rather work on a matchless, or would you rather work on an amp where there's actually a schematic that follows and then it has nomenclature on the PC board to tell you where every part is, so you don't have to go search for it. And
that's true.
And they're always the same. I mean, and plus the fact that, like, you know, that guy, I'll tell you what, he gave us a 9 out of 10, and hopefully he's watching, and because he said, well, I don't understand, because I said I've never been so annoyed out of a 9 out of 10. And he says, I don't know why you'd be annoyed. And well, because he was casting doubt on things that he didn't know. Like he would say, I don't know where these are made, but I have my suspicions.
Right.
Well,
what is that?
You know, they're made in Lake Elsinore, California. But why can't we say that on the box? Why do we have to say assembled?
Why is that?
Because California law. California state law says that you cannot say made in the USA unless virtually everything comes from the USA. So even it's like there's a percentage, I can't remember what the percentage is, but it's a pretty narrow margin.
And how many electronic parts come from the USA these days?
Basically none. And that was the other thing that kind of annoyed me, is like, he goes, oh, they're using alpha pots. Yeah, the alpha pots happen to perform and be extremely reliable. And then he says they could have used something like a CTS, you know, a nice quality American pot. What? CTS is made in China. They're no longer made in the United States. So,
and they're sketchy as hell these days.
Well, I use CTS on guitars because they are the standard. It's what Fender uses and what they always use. But, you know, and I'm really tempted to start looking at other pots. But, you know,
I mean, they've been the standard forever. But once again, when you get things, so this is a great thing. Why build in the USA? Well, CTS pots that have been the standard forever. You might notice now, hey, I got a new guitar, you know, I mean, of whatever brand using CTS pot. You got this part in there they don't make them in America anymore. They're made overseas, and you get them. You're like, why is my pot scratchy after 3 months? That kind of thing, right? And it's like, well, this is what you deal with when you know what I mean. But that's
I mean, our transformers are made here. We use Haybor for pretty much everything we use. And they're all custom wound to our specs. You know, we assemble in-house, but the reason we can't say made in the USA is just California law. And most people out there saying made in the USA shouldn't be saying it. And it's definitely it's a fuzzy area. But then again, I could import Chinese transformers. I could import my boards already stuffed from China, where we don't have to do anything except basic assembly. I could import all that stuff into my shop, and I could still say assembled in the USA. I mean, it's not fair, but just so people know, we are 100%. Everything we can possibly do is US. And it's just because we want the control. I don't want to rely on somebody else.
And so with that in mind, one more thing about that review, he said something about CE and Rojas or whatever. And
it was another piece of ignorance. He was saying, I have my doubts as to the CE because there's no documentation in the manual that it's actually been done by a lab, or that maybe it's self-certified. Most people don't have the gear that they need to self-certify. So we do send out to a lab to have our product CE tested. But what?
I said, and it's not cheap.
No, it's not cheap. And I understand he seems to be in some kind of industry where he also has to deal with it. So like me, I tend to get a little pissy if I don't see a CE sticker on somebody's amp, because I think it just means that they didn't go through the effort, or, you know, and it could possibly be dangerous. What if they're fusing the neutral instead of the hot, you know, on the power? Or, you know, what if, but Rojas, and then he made a comment about Rojas. And the funny thing is that Rojas is included in CE. And why don't I include the report? It's 82 pages. I mean, really, you want to see an 82-page report you're not going to understand? I mean,
and this is some of the most, like, for anybody out there that's watching right now, is for some of the most boring stuff you can think of when it comes to tone and guitars and amps. But this is thing that keeps your house from burning down, so it's safe.
Yeah.
And so it bothered me on the level where it's like, I don't think anybody crosses their T's and dots their I's more than you. So to question it, you will go to the greatest lengths to make sure that the amplifiers are safe and certified and all that stuff. So that just bothered me, and I just wanted to touch on.
Well, you have a lot to lose. You know, if you make an amplifier and you make it so that a 2-year-old can stick his hand in the back and burn his hands on the tube, you're going to get sued. So, you know, people should take that stuff seriously, and I think it's good that we all abide by it, you know, for our safety. I mean, what happens if you forget to leave your amp on? You left your amp on all week. You don't want to take it down your house, but there are amps that might. So I do agree with the reviewer that it has to be CE and it has to be inspected. What I didn't agree with on his review is that he cast some doubt as to whether I actually had the rights to put CE on it. And I was like, he just didn't have a clue. So I just don't like people who do reviews without the backup. You know, it's like,
yeah, because then the comments below, you get this list of comments where it just creates fuel for a fire, and it's absolutely.
It's probably made in China, and he probably just slapped CE on there just for the sake, and he's ripping us all off with the price. Now, you know, when people and I know this is probably going to be one of the questions, when people talk about price.
Let's talk about that. Like, why does it cost what it costs? Building
labor.
Okay. So what does that mean? Like.
That means if you want to give employees in the United States a chance to be part of the manufacturing industry and to bring product into the United States, you have to take care of those employees. Kids these days can come out of school and make a really good living. This is a tough world that we live in with the musicians because we're competing against import labor prices. And when you do business in the United States, you've got things like healthcare. You know, if I don't give my employees healthcare, they're going to go work for bonds. You know, a lot of these guys starting at a minimum wage job in a guitar factory can go work at the local grocery store and get better benefits. They can go work at Starbucks and make more money. I mean, but you don't have, you know, people in Indonesia making better money working at Starbucks.
Right.
It's really labor, but I still think it's important. And I do think that the support, I mean, I am about making product that is not disposable. You and I were talking about this the other day where, you know, when I started thinking about people say tubes are not reliable, it's bullshit. The tubes are very reliable if you get a good tube. Getting a good tube can be difficult, but the amplifiers are pretty damn reliable because, and the way I look at it is anybody with a little bit of technical knowledge can fix 90% of the problems you're going to have with a tube amp. I've got, sitting next to me, I've got 2 subwoofers for my home theater that both need to have their power supplies rebuilt. And they're not even 10 years. Yeah, they crapped out. They're not even 10 years old. I got a Dynaudio monitor that I'm not listening to right now, but my Dynaudio monitor on my desk that had 2 10-volt, 470 microfarad capacitors that are probably cost about 5 cents, 10 cents. Both go bad. And the manufacturer wouldn't even help me. It's like I said, hey, I said, I can work on this stuff. Can you point me? Because they usually know what went wrong and why, because it's happened to them before. So I'm sure they could say, oh yeah, these 2 parts, we underrated them. You just need to replace them. But no, they're like, send the monitor to New York. I'm like, screw that. So I pulled it apart and found the 2 caps and, you know, they looked bad. So I replaced them and it worked. But I had the same thing go wrong with both monitors. And I bought both of these monitors. This cost me $1,000 in 2012 or 2013.
Isn't that crazy that they both went bad to like planned obsolescence at the same time?
You can imagine my wife. I've also got a audio-visual receiver that's dropping audio. It's an Onkyo. It's another $1,000 box. It's an Onkyo. And it's not even 8 years old, I don't think. And it's not passing sound sometimes. Yeah. And so it's the DSP chip and it's the ball grid array underneath the DSP chip is cracks and comes undone. But my point is that So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 solid state things that just went bad on me this month. I mean, tubes are extremely reliable. I mean, filter caps are the only thing you usually have to worry about in tubes, but you worry about filter caps in solid state too.
So to kind of tie it all together, because we started off talking about you on the floor and looking at guitars and like having that control to make things in the USA. So you've got, some ability to see what's going on in all the different departments in your shop. And, for everything from R&D, from your office where it all starts, going out to the floor, you've got the ability to control all that. When you start building things overseas, yes, you can save money. And yes, you might be able to get an amplifier built for, $1,200 and bring it to the customer. But you don't have this kind of control, and things can go wrong. And you said to me a little while ago, you said, I'm not interested in making the cheapest. I want to make the best. Like, exactly. I don't understand when people don't get that. And that totally makes sense to me. You want to make the best, And so
I don't want to buy disposable product. I'm tired of disposable product. Gosh, you got a TV now that it's warranted for 1 year, and 2 months out of warranty, it goes dead. And you paid $4,000 for it. They tell you to go screw yourself. They don't care.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that refrigerators and all the new kitchen appliances are not designed to last for more than 10 years. I think it's ridiculous. I mean, what happened to the day you used to be able to go down to the radio store and fix your TV?
Well, I had a MacBook Pro that went bad before my Badger. I had my Badger for like 12, 15 years, and maybe now I need to replace a tube. And I have a MacBook Pro I bought 5 years ago, and I had to replace the whole motherboard last year. So on the 4th year, I had to replace the whole motherboard.
Well, that's the thing, that company, and we're all locked down on one of these computers right now. And every 5 years, it seems like they want you to get a whole new phone.
You better back up. It's not if, it's when. But, I'm tired of disposable product. I shouldn't care that much as I get older.
So when you mentioned so it's labor. So this is the cost of employing people in California, paying them a great wage, giving them health care.
Not even a great wage. It's an okay
right.
Wage.
These fair, right? Fair. So
it's enough of a wage that they will stay with me because they enjoy doing what they do.
And there you go. And that's the difference between an amp because our amp's $26.99 versus something that's, built overseas and is whatever, if you can get something but it's just not the same, I mean, it's not the same thing. I just maintain.
If we could do it cheaper, we would do it cheaper without sacrificing that quality.
Hey, I mean, that's it. I remember the time that you guys actually with the PT100, when we went from the silver ones to the blue ones, you changed, and Kevin, you did this too, and this helped actually bring the cost of the PT15 down when you built the iPad thing to help simplify the build for people, right? I remember when John did the same thing, making the PT100 easier to build, and the amp was $32.95, and you're like, yeah, actually, I found out a better way to do something.
Redesign the PC board.
And you said it's easier to build now, and we're going to pass the savings on to the customer. And the amp went down from $32.95 to $29.95 the next year. Mm-hmm. You didn't have to do that. You could have just kept that dough, but you didn't. You passed it on.
Well, a lot of people. It kind of frustrates me when people go, "Oh, look at the price of the guitar. Look at the price of the amp. They're making bank. They really have no idea of the cost of doing business. And do you want a company to be reasonably successful, to be able to live through a crisis such as the one we're going through right now? Or do you want a company to give you the best possible price and live on the edge, and then you don't care if they go BK because a pandemic takes them down? I mean, I would think you would want to own product from companies who are stable and who can weather the storm and be there to support you when you need them. Because the last thing you want is, oh, my amplifier went down, but the company doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Totally.
We have no one to talk to. I mean, anytime someone has a problem, they just email us and we deal with it,
Yep.
And that's always been the case. And I don't think, however old your amp is, we'll figure out a solution if there's anything wrong. And that's not always easy with other companies.
You know what? There's another controversy on the internet that's pretty fascinating. But yeah, just because you're a good manufacturer, or it doesn't mean that you're going to be good with customer service and good with handling your employees. I mean, handling your customers. So I think that the customer service and that part of the experience of support is also what you're getting from us. Our lifetime, the way we deal with things. we try to help everybody.
Sorry, I just had to close my door there, guys.
Oh.
Okay. Well, I've got a bunch more questions here that we should probably just get to. First of all, Ray Potter was up there in the top chat and the super chat. Thanks, Ray. He just wanted to say thank you for what you guys do. I appreciate that, man.
Well, thank you, Ray.
Thanks, Ray.
And if anybody needs an aura, I'm sure Ray has it because he tends to buy everyone he finds.
So, okay, Rico USA said he's got a new Suhr dealer coming online in his area soon, and he was just wondering, like, any tips on marketing to make it a success, like help give the dealer a boost. Which actually, music stores, I mean, certainly during this like crazy times we're going through right now, are going to need help. But the thing with the product is, it's like it kind of, you try it and it sort of sells itself. I don't know what else to say. Just getting people in and picking up a guitar. I mean, that was my experience when I first played a Suhr guitar. I was just so knocked out that I was like, oh, I was an instant fan. So
sweet. Well, thank you.
He's just saying, is there any tips on marketing? I don't know, anything you can do to. Just spread the word.
I'm the worst marketer there is. But I have we've got. I leave that all up to sales and marketing.
Is Tall Person was asking, would you ever consider producing an arch top or jazz box or something like that?
The funny thing is that some people say, "Oh, I've got two stories of how I got into this business in the first place." But it's really just so everybody knows, I never went into this thinking this is what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be a guitar player in a band, and I was, going to enjoy myself. Unfortunately, I let my gear get in the way of my practice and my playing. So I always found something wrong with my gear that would distract me, and then I would go off on a tangent to fix the gear issue.
Mm-hmm.
But it's what was the original question?
Oh, he was saying, would you ever consider producing an arch top, like a jazz box?
Yeah. So when I started doing this, like I was saying, this wasn't my intent. I had a Strat. One of my earlier guitars in the 70s was a Strat, and I hated the neck. It had a real round fingerboard on it. I couldn't play it. It was just very difficult to learn on. I think it was maple to boot, which really made it difficult to play on. So I had a local jazz box builder in Pennsylvania. I used to live in New Jersey, and his name was Bob Benedetto.
Very famous, yeah.
And so I went to see Bob because he said, "Sure, I can make you a neck for your Strat." And it was dirt cheap too at the time. I think it was maybe a couple $100, installed, painted, everything.
Wow.
And I went to his shop because his wife went to high school with my sister, and so he was real nice. And I basically watched him do a lot of the work. It was a multi-lam back, so it had like Ubinga or Rosewood or something in the middle with
like a guitar he was building, or
he built me a neck for my Strat.
The neck
so,
he was
yeah. So and he let me design the headstock, which was interesting. But and so he basically built the guitar to my specs, and I was so fascinated by what he was doing because I was like, wow, this is really cool. You can have control over every possible aspect of what's here. So he said, so I said, could I apprentice with you? Because I'm real fascinated by this. At the time, I was just playing in bands, so I had time. And he says, no. He said, I don't believe in apprentices. He goes, don't get into this business. He goes, it will be, he says it's all consuming and it's very little reward, and you're going to deal with situations that are impossible to deal with. You're going to build a $60,000 guitar for someone who doesn't want it because he doesn't like it. I mean, he goes, it's a tough world. And he goes, my advice to you is don't do it. And he goes, and if you're destined to do it, you'll do it anyway, regardless of what I tell you. And the funny thing is that when I was started at Rudy's, which was probably 15 years later, I bumped into Bob at a trade show, and at that time I was starting to have some success. So I just wanted to thank Bob for his words of wisdom, and I agreed with him. So now to this day, I tell people who say, "How do I get into this business?" I go, "Don't do it." And so but the heartbreaking thing for me is Bob, you're the reason I got started into doing what I'm doing. And Bob really didn't know anything about me. He didn't know any of my at that time. I think I was making guitars for Mark Knopfler and Peter Frampton and Lou Reed and all those guys. And so but he didn't know any of that. He was just in his own, jazz box world. And I said, I just want to thank you for inspiring me to do what I do and just letting me visit your shop. And he didn't remember me. Yeah. It was heartbreaking. But then eventually I said, don't you remember your sister went to school with your wife went to school with my sister? And he's like, oh, yeah. So then he opened up and he sent me a copy of his Jazz Box book, which is a great book. If anybody wants to read about building jazz boxes, Bob Benedetto has a great one. And so I've thought about it, but like Kevin's point is, I think at this time there's other things. I think there's some great jazz boxes out there. I'm more interested in making things that don't really quite exist. So if I can build a better mousetrap, I will go for it. If I don't like what's out there and I think we can do it better, I'll go for it. But I don't want to make a copy of something, which is another thing that always bugs me when people say my instruments are a copy of something else. They're heavily inspired for sure, but I'm about making something that satisfies my frustrations with things that the guitars are lacking. So I don't consider that a copy. A copy to me would have the same flaws and the same features. But I try to massage these products into something to eliminate the shit that used to get in my way as a guitar player. Like if you can't play because your intonation is jacked, and I used to have a BC Rich that drove me crazy when I was a kid. I could never get the thing to stay in tune, and I could never figure out why. And so that's the kind of thing where like it'll get in my way, and I'll become paralyzed, and I won't play until I figure it out. So that's where I kind of come from, is fixing the issue.
Yep. Just real quick, Steve Rayburn had a question. He's up there in the super chat, and he's wondering about, and guys, everybody's super chats, I got them all written down here, so I'm gonna get to all of them with the top chats. I'm just seeing his. He says if he wants to choose a slightly different fret size on a custom order guitar than the 3 standard sizes that normally appear on your standard order form, can he do that? Can he pick a custom fret?
I might consider it if it's from Menzerna, but you have to understand, if it's from Just Gar, you have to understand that the tangs are different sizes, and we cut the fret slots very specific for each fret wire for each style of wood. So if I have to re-engineer that, or it has to be custom done, then there's probably going to be upcharges associated with it. But I'm curious as to what's he looking for, a low fret wire?
Yeah, Steve, maybe you can let us know if there's just put it in the chat there.
Because none of my fret wire is particularly low. I tend to like taller fret wire.
Couple others here in the, what is somebody was asking, is John still a Gardein guy?
A Gardein.
What is that?
Gardein.
It's issues with was it gastrointestinal reflux disease?
I think he's referring to the brand of like faux meat, Gardein.
Oh, okay.
What?
Vegetarian, vegan. Gardein.
Didn't you say GERD?
Gardein.
Gardeins. I thought he was talking about GERD.
No.
We eat whatever we can. It's like we're talking about vegan food now.
We don't want to get too off track, but you guys are basically, Kevin's vegan, you're pescatarian, right?
Let's say that. No, I would say that
we don't eat red meat. We don't eat chicken. We rarely eat fish, but usually not.
We try to avoid fish, and I have a cheese is a little hard for me. I like a good Danish blue cheese or a Roquefort or Reggiano Parmesan, but other than that, I try to avoid cheese just because I don't know, it just doesn't agree with me anymore. And I also think that dairy is just as horrific. Factory dairy farming is just as horrific as meat farming. So yeah, we try to we think it's better for us too, because we're eating a shit ton more vegetables. And we bought an air fryer the other day, which I highly recommend to anybody who loves eating vegetables. Air fryers are very cool.
I got to try that. Okay, so somebody had a question about, it was Ralph. There was a running change made. It's been for a long time now, the PT-15. And and he's just wondering about having his updated. Now, we should just say it was just like one little thing that was changed on the clean, right?
Well, in all honesty, there was two things. We boosted the output of the headphones because some people, Kevin has extremely sensitive hearing, and he wants to preserve it. And he just kind of set the volumes on the headphone out so that he felt it was all you should need and keep your ears happy. But in dealing with us old guys, including me, we always ask for a little more. Can I have more volume? So he did boost the output up a little bit. The bright mod on the clean channel was something that Pete, after a while, had just gone back and forth between one of his, I was a bandmaster or a bassman, and you were just kind of like, I want a little bit of that extra sparkle there. I'm missing that. So it luckily turned out to be one part that we add. And but we've been doing that for a while, actually.
It's like
I think probably anything after NAMM. Do we have a date on that, Kevin? But if somebody's curious about if they feel that they're in the
before NAMM
zone,
for sure, since last year.
But it's really a running update that we did. So, but if anybody wants theirs updated, we don't charge for the update, but they will have to take care of shipping.
Yeah, I think he was asking about having a local tech do it, and that gets dicey if they're not.
No, I'm not worried about that. If it's a local tech, and it's just
it's an easy mod.
It's so simple, right?
Yeah,
I'll put
a sparkle cap.
We did it on my amp at a sound check of my actually it wasn't my amp, it was the one I was borrowing over in the UK. So literally my tech did it in about 10 minutes. It's adding one cap. So if you guys, if you could, who should he contact about it? Just
I'd say customer service.
So cs@suhr.com, send him an email.
And we kind of switched around our web a little bit so it's easier to find the customer service, and also all the manuals are on one tab now.
Just the differences you're going to find on it is, now I run my clean channel with this is PT15 we're talking about here. I run it with the bright on. I've got the treble on 6 and the bass on 4. If I look at it right now, and there's plenty of sparkle and stuff. I used to run the treble more up around 8. So it just opens up the clean channel a little bit in a really nice way. It's very simple, but it's not like there was a problem with it originally. It was just like this little running change where we wanted.
I think what you use for speakers too is going to, like, if you use V30s, you might not need it, but if you're using greenbacks, it's
right. And depending on your guitar, there might be people that like it the other way. Who knows?
Yeah, with a Strat, you might not want it. I don't know.
Yeah,
especially if it's got 70s style pickups.
Somebody else was asking about the Kelly got discontinued, and just asking why. I'm going to guess it's just because of like the nature of the single channel amp, kind of loud. It's not an inexpensive amp, and it was probably just it's an incredible sounding amp, but maybe it's just the way the market was going.
Yeah, everything's driven by customers. It's kind of like you get a dealer who goes, well, why'd you discontinue that? Well, you weren't buying them.
There you go.
So when people got to understand that we can't just make 5 amps. You've got to order hundreds of chassis or hundreds of transformers to get the price reasonable. If you order 10 of something from a transformer company or a chassis company or a PC board company, you're going to pay through the nose. So it's supply and demand. If you guys don't buy it, it's going to get discontinued, and that's what you're going to see in the world. So
yeah,
if you buy it, we're not going to discontinue it. If we're not making money on it, we'll raise the price. But that's at least we give you the choice if you still want it, because it costs more money to make because of the parts. Like, for instance, that had custom made CTS push pull pots, things that made that amp really expensive. Like, you can't just, we had to buy thousands of potentiometers, and
if you're not getting orders, you got to keep all those parts around on the shelf, and
it's an awful lot of money. It's inventory, and you know what? We pay tax on that inventory at the end of the year too. So as far as the government's concerned, I don't care if you put all your money in inventory. It's your money, so you're paying tax on it, even though you don't have any.
It's a good, excellent point. Couple up there in the top chat right now, super chat. Chris Cam was saying, does John still have his Carina Antique T? And what's Kevin's main guitar and amp?
Yes, I do. And I also have a Double Cut Junior, which is I grew up playing those guitars, and I got that along with my Brown Deluxe. So,
yeah, 59 Junior, right? That you got.
Yeah.
Great deal you got on it too. Is it
yeah,
nice?
$1,500.
Oh, and that's Kevin's main guitar. That's cool. I haven't seen that
Yeah.
one. It's an antique, right? Yeah, it's nice.
You actually did. You did play it when you were over and you're playing through my Vincent Echo Rec.
Oh, did I? Is that the one I was playing? Oh, okay. Yeah, God,
I didn't change the strings in forever, and you told me to get it cleaned up. So
Kevin's got more vintage gear than I do.
Yeah,
Kevin's got a real Vincent, which is amazing sounding. He's got a real appreciation for old. There it is. And,
there you go.
And is that still an old custom audio PT? Is that your main amp that you use
there? I used that one. I used the Badger, and now I have a PT15. You can see over there.
Oh yeah,
and
cool.
I've been using the PT15 a lot. I've been loving it. And I was actually just recording with it the other day through 4x12, and this I just had like a little Neumann on
cool.
there.
Yeah,
but that's I don't know if I have a main amp. I would say either this actually is something my dad was modding for Guthrie Govan a long time ago.
Oh, is it?
Was like a 50 watt thing, and I think because I used to have the PT100 and someone took it for a tour or something. We didn't have one at the time. It was years ago. So then I just got this instead, and
it vanished.
And it works well, but either that or I use the Badger, or the PT15 is so convenient because I do have a patch bay here, and I have the PT line output going to the patch bay, so I could just patch it into my Apollo, or I can easily switch things. Or I have the reactive loads in the patch bay too, so I could plug in one of the amps into that reactive load stack, and it's already in my patch bay. So if I want to record with any of those amps, I can just patch any of them in.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of cool with the PT15 that it's just I can just go straight from that into the patch bay and just plug it into my Apollo, or any other instruments I have in here.
For those guys that don't know, Kevin's like, I mean, when I first met you, you were pretty young, and you were kind of like 7-string down tune metal playing, a lot of like, and you're really good at it. And then like, as he's like, gotten older, he became an electrical engineer and the whole 9 yards. And then also got into like a lot of like electronic music and stuff. Right. And you got real appreciation for vintage synths. And so like, and vintage electronics, so it's like what you bring to the table is like this really cool other, cause you have this appreciation for, so on that note, actually, Adam has he's up in the super chat, and he says, Kevin, what's your favorite style of music, and what would you like to see get added to the Suhr line of products?
Wow, he's working on it.
Yeah, he's actually working on it. We can't talk about it, but it's amazing.
I'm working on some, but I always like I like a lot of stuff. Like you were saying, I used to play a lot of metal when I was younger, so I was like into trying to do technical fast metal, like sweeping and stuff like that. And then I went
telling your Marco Meneman story.
Yeah, I was into bands like Necrophagist, and they're really fast technical, almost like metal band. And I used to try and write music like that when I was younger, and it was just very like I had to learn my own songs. Like I would write the song and I'd have to learn it, and the drums on it were just like very fast blast beats. They're just like it sounds like almost like a machine gun. And my dad's like heard some of it, and he's like, no drummer's ever going to be able to play that. I'm gonna be like, I said, well, Marco Minimum can play that because he played with Necrophagist on a tour. And then eventually Marco Minimum started playing with Guthrie Govan, and he came to our shop, and I was in college, and my dad like sent me a photo of Marco Minimum. I was like, oh shit. And then now he's like a family friend, so it was really funny. But yeah, I started listening to metal music. Then I went to college, and was kind of a little nervous to bring my guitars because I went to UCSB and the theft rate is a little high there. And so I just kind of went, at that time I was getting into like electronic music. So I was doing some dance music stuff, and I was playing out at school, doing some of that stuff. And then when I came back, I started getting a little tired of that, and I started listening to more classic rock music, and just a lot of like 70s, 60s rock music. I love all these British bands, I love Pink Floyd and the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and, all that stuff. So I think especially since I was getting back into the guitar stuff and working at work, I felt like I needed to understand what our customer was the tones they were going after and what kind of vibes they were going after. And eventually I kind of got hooked on a lot of analog stuff. So I have in this room, I have, analog synthesizers, and I have a tape machine. Oh, wrong way. Yeah. And I got a tape machine over here. It's a TAC 80-8. So
old school. Be something like that. Something like that Steve Vai probably used to record Flexible. We were talking about that last week in the interview I did with them. Yeah, a machine like one of those early 8-track kind of home studio 8-tracks. It's pretty cool.
Oh yeah. Or I got an old Porto Studio sitting right here. But now I listen to a lot of classic rock music. There's a lot of new, like, I guess it would be called psychedelic rock music for new bands. Like one band I like is some of the old Tame Impala songs, or there's a band called King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard, and bunch of different weird stuff. And then a lot of times I listen to like chill tracks too, some like chill electronica that I listen to during work. Or
it's interesting. I do too, like to get away from guitar sometimes, because it's like no mids, anything without that mid range, which I love, but then like getting the other,
or I like listening to dub music. Dub music's like reggae without vocals. It's just like they would throw them through a bunch of delays, like echoplexes and stuff, and it would almost be like a DJ mixing a reggae song without the vocals and running them through delays. So I love hearing all these vintage stuff. I love it a lot of stuff from any Abbey Road recordings. I think all these vintage Abbey Road recordings sound amazing with all their preamps and tape and the Neumann microphones they used to use. So I'm just a geek and all that. So
yeah,
it goes around, but yeah, my tastes have changed. Now I'm going even back to a little more electronic stuff too. So I don't know. I have a wide range of stuff I listen to.
David had a question, and I guess we can all address this: the difference between the PT 112 and the standard 112. I mean, the only real differences are the cosmetically, it's got the matching Tolex for the head, but also we picked the H speaker, the H creamback, and your standard, I believe, is it a Vet 30 from?
It's a Warehouse,
Warehouse Vet 30,
and the corner radius matches the head, so it's a little different look, and of course the Tolex. So
yeah,
it's basically the same. And just FYI, so was the Kelly. Kelly liked my design, but I designed that basic speaker back when I first went to Bradshaw, and then I increased the size when we did the Badgers because I thought it sounded better. But it's a front ported, and it's all tuned very carefully. It's all done with software, and it's analyzed to be correct. So
great sounding cabinet. I mean, and I really love. We listened to a few different speakers, and when we heard the H, that creamback H, there's something about it all the way from clean through to dirty. It's just a really, really good all-in-one speaker, I think. I like greenbacks. I'm a greenback guy, but for clean sounds, I find they're a little sort of ho-hum sounding. I don't know how else to describe it. Like if you do want to get it, a clean sound that's got some chimey top end and that's got a nice kind of excitement to it, the greenbacks, they kind of lie there, but that's exactly the same thing that make it sound great through a crunchy distortion, with a crunchy distorted amp running through it. Kind of almost the warmer and the more woody, the better when it comes to that. So something about the creamback H, it just captures. It was the best all around speaker from clean through to dirty.
Hey Pete,
mm-hmm.
I'd like to address this guy Matt, who also has a hot one there. I'm wondering if he's looking at a forgery. All of our standard pros do have contoured neck heels.
Yeah, I saw that question. He said, "Standard Pro, why no contoured heel?" Because he's looking at getting a Standard Pro. Is there a sonic benefit? And that's what I thought. I thought, no, they all have contoured heel, right?
Yeah.
So that's
even the Modern has a contoured heel in a certain aspect, but I've seen forgeries that don't. Unfortunately, maybe it's flattery, but we do get a lot of Chinese import bootleg forgeries.
Yeah, so watch out for those if you guys are looking for
be careful.
Used
We're happy to answer those questions. You can find me in multiple places or customer service.
Yeah, send at email, right? cs@suhr.com. Just ask to verify that it's actually one of your guitars. Mike had a question as well up there in this top chat about what's your position on roasted necks beyond just the aesthetics, like stability and
roasted is like synthetically, it's like zirconian wood. I mean, you're aging the wood. I think roasting is wonderful. It winds up the wood winds up tap toning. I can take a range of, I don't know if you can see my hands. If I can take everything's reversed here. I can take a range of tap tone, and after roasting, those same range will go like to here. So it kind of equalizes the wood. As it ages, they all tend to sound more and more similar. But roasting makes the wood more dimensionally stable. It's kind of a partial charcoal. The correct term is torrefaction. I think that's what it is, torrefaction. And you can buy flooring for your house that you can put it outside. Termites don't like it. Nothing likes it because a lot of the sap and a lot of the good stuff is all baked out of it, which is what would happen naturally over an aging process. Everything crystallizes, and I think it's more vibrant. I have no problem. The only reason not to use roasted is because you don't like the look. Like, you're not going to want to take a roasted piece of alder and do a 3-tone sunburst on it. It's not. I mean, it'll look nice, but it won't look like what you're expecting. It's going to be dark,
like the vintage look, or it'll be something else. Yeah, right.
And along that lines, and with the controversy that's going on with another builder in Southern California, it's just like stainless steel wire. You can get roasted wood from multiple sources. That doesn't mean it's all the same. I've gotten roasted wood from some suppliers that's not stable and it doesn't really have any other benefits. So where it gets done is really important. Is just like anything else. There's many ways to do it. You can't just put a piece of wood in an oven and toast it and say it's been used torrefaction or it's roasted. It's not. So it depends where you get the wood. It depends who does the process. The people that we originally used were the people that designed and had the patents on the kiln, which is basically cooking it at very high temperature with very low oxygen so it doesn't pop into flames. And as far as the color of roasted, which is the other controversy that I've been seeing, the lighter the roast, the less benefit you're going to have because they're just doing less of the process. And you can take it all the way up to the extreme part of the process, which is on a lot of fingerboards for a while when they were looking for alternatives. So the problem with the real dark roast is the wood becomes more brittle. So when you go to pull frets, if you ever need a fret job, the guy who's pulling the frets needs to really know what he's doing, or it's going to be more fragile, more brittle than pulling frets out of ebony.
It's like one step short of being charcoal, basically, at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, but the comments I've seen, where people, every piece of wood is going to roast differently. Not so much. If you usually have choices when you order the wood, you can say, I want, a real dark, heavy roasted one pushing toward the charcoal territory, or you can say, I want a medium roast, which is what most of us do, where you can order a super light roast. I don't stock that because we generally only stock one roast, and we like to keep it all about the same color. So somebody orders a fingerboard and the back of the neck, I'm going to assume that if they order both of those in roasted wood, that they want them to look very similar, if not pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think roasted is wonderful stuff. I don't find any disadvantage of it at all, except for the smell when you're working with it, and sanding and refretting, and it's not fun to work with. It's kind of like stainless steel wire in that regard.
Yeah, I've had great experiences with it, just neck stability on the road and stuff like that. It seems to be really, and they don't twist, and it's just like, seems like
they're definitely much more. It's more dimensionally stable, and it's not as susceptible to shifts in humidity and weather and neck adjustments. It's definitely more stable.
A couple others. Christopher up there in the super chat. He says he's just got a question about Dumbles. He says Dumbles don't have an effects loop. I remember Larry Carlton's Starlix video where he said he had a loop in his amp and used a Dumbleator to interface with his outboard. I think that's right. It had to be an added box.
Yeah, well,
right?
you just said the magic word, Dumbleator. Yeah. That's his effects loop. What he has in the amp is an insert point. So he puts a point in the amp where you can add an effects loop if you want to spend another. I don't know how much the Dumbleators go for. $5,000.
Oh my God! Really? Wow. Yeah.
But we chose just to put everything in the amp. Plus, on the Hedgehog, you can program in whether the loop is in or whether it's out, and you can also program whether it's series or parallel. So in parallel, if you have like our friend uses did we use an Alesis, Pete? Ty?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if you've got a noisy old effect, like you got a quadriverb around and you go, well, shit, this will never work. I don't want to run my signal through this. The beauty of our parallel loops is that you can add the effect instead of running through it.
Dry tone stays pure. There's no latency. You're not running your whole signal through. Yeah.
You set the effect for 100% wet and you just add in the amount of effect you want.
So 2 questions about that. Actually, okay, real quick. I'm gonna remember these, keep them in the forefront of my mind. But somebody else was just up in the top chat, real quick, and then I got 2 specific questions about loops, effects loops, and interfacing effects. So Jason Hobbs up there in the top chat, he says, "Mr. Suhr, what's your reasoning for the name behind Hedgehog and Badger? How did you name those amps?" Oh, John, did you freeze? I think we got a freeze going. We still working here? Uh-oh.
Are we all there?
Yeah, can you hear us, John?
Yeah, I got you now. You
okay,
pop back in. Kevin's gone.
Had to buffer for a second. Okay, John, somebody was just asking about the names Hedgehog and Badger. How did you name those 2 amps?
Furry creatures. I don't know. It's just looking for some theme. A lot of the pedals were done after our dogs' names. Like Koji is a Koji compressor. Koji is my golden Shiba Inu. Right. And then we got Coco for the Coco Boost. She's our black and white Shiba Inu. And I kind of ran out of dogs. I mean, Riot was another person's dog, and so was Rufus. I kind of ran out of dogs. So for the amplifiers, I just kind of thought I wanted to call it a honey badger because honey badgers are just incredibly evil, just amazing. I mean, I've heard that they're just small package and they'll rip a deer's nuts off or something. I mean, they're really. But then you've also got the Hedgehog was just you got Badger, Hedgehog. They're all
animal themed.
I don't know. I just thought it was kind of cool.
Oh, with the
fuzzy rodents.
Fuzzy rodents with effects loops. This was a question from some of the sales guys to just address, like, why do some amps not work as well with effects loops? What was the question? Why can you have an effects loop in some amps and not in others, and why does it ruin certain circuits? So I would think of like a Plexi or something, for instance. They're not great, right? You hear me there, John? Okay, John's still getting the sound back together.
Yeah, I got kicked off for a minute.
Can you still hear us?
Maybe he's got to charge his AirPods.
Oh,
yeah, I got the AirPods Pro, and he's got the old AirPods, so his probably suck.
Oh, he's got to plug them in. So that might mean we're here for a minute without any sound. I wonder if he can change his audio preferences or something to just go to the camera audio.
Well, I was charging one. You got me now?
Oh, there you go.
Oh, there you are. There you are. Got you.
The other one.
Okay. So effects loops in certain amps, like, for example, like, why do certain amps work well with them and other ones, like, say, Plexis or whatever, like, did they kind of ruin the circuit, right?
And I'm sure you can explain this, Pete, in your world, because we've had those discussions where I'll say, delays really suck in front of the gain. And you go, well, I don't know. That's kind of cool for a certain thing. But basically in a general, back in the day when I was designing amps and getting into all this stuff, I mean, my head was into like the Bradshaw Riggs and Steve Lukather and people like that, Mike Landau. And for all of that, and I guess in the recording world too, you generally will mic an amplifier after it's already been distorted, and then you will add your delays and your reverbs, your plate reverbs or whatever, as long as we're not talking about spring reverbs. But when we're talking about overdrives and things like that, you usually want all your time-based effects to come after the drive. So in an amplifier like an SL68, which basically a plexi style amp where you don't have a master volume and you're just cranking the amp, or even the Ombre, if you put stuff in a loop, you've got to make sure of two things. Number one, that the loop is really transparent and it's not going to muck with your tone. You don't have a level loss going through the loop because that's going to change the way the whole amp sounds. But it's a little more ideal to have the effect be on the total output of the amp than it is to put it in the middle someplace. Now, if you've got your gain built into the preamp and your sound is basically in the preamp and not necessarily dependent on the power section or the tubes, the output section, the tubes, then you can maintain that style of relationship where you've got your gain first, then you've got your effects, and then you amplifying it to the volume you need it. And if there's a little bit of power amp saturation in there, that's fine. But if you put a delay in front of your whole amp, then it can get messy, or you have to be really careful because you're amplifying it so much. But so those, if you like you could put a parallel loop in an SL68, but you're adding something that wasn't there in the original. And my intent on the SL68 was that it stayed true to the original design. And people can get themselves in trouble with loops. Like, the guy called me the other day and he's putting hey, why doesn't my overdrive pedal work in my effects loop? Well, that's not where you put that.
Yeah.
But so, you can't change the gain structure if you're depending on the output section. If the overdrive is happening in the preamp section, then you can put a loop in. But if you're not, then you're running a risk. Like those Marshall the Marshalls that have the solid state effects loops, they've got op amp effects loops. It seems kind of sacrilegious. Here you've got right,
like 1987X or whatever, like their new versions of the Plexi. Right?
Yeah, it's not right to put the loop there. It doesn't work very well.
It seems like any amp, like when I think of AC30s, modern ones that implement certain things, or like when I think of an amp where it seems like the whole package is reliant on cranking it up to a certain point, those are the ones that don't work well with effects loops.
Well, it's kind of also like then you're distorting your effect. Right. So you're going a little bit toward the direction of putting it in the front, which not everybody wants. Usually people want their tone. Really, the ultimate way to do this is don't use a loop at all. Of course, It's a lot more gear, but if you really want to do it a way where the effects don't muck with anything, they should ideally be coming out of a different set of speakers and a different amplifier.
These are the things that Landau and Scott Henderson do so well, and other folks, Eddie Van Halen, or
those guys hear it. If you've got multiple repeats going on there and distortion on all the repeats, you're kind of taking up space for other things to be going on. Things like I think Landau used to tell me, I think that he couldn't get the right kind of feedback when his effects were in the loop.
Scott too.
Yeah. So they switched a long time ago to whenever they can to using like our line out box. Landau was using that. I know he also went to miking his cabinets and having a separate PA. That's how crazy he got. So
that's actually I think it's not that uncommon. Folks like John Shanks does that now, and I think that's kind of Larry Carlton stuff too when he was doing.
Isn't Shanks using his like rig or?
Well, Shanks actually he's got a dry cabinet mic'd, and then through an API mic pre, a nice mic pre, and then it goes into a mixer, and then all the effects in his rack are in the mixer, and then the front of house just gets a stereo line out right out of his rack. So he's doing that whole mic'd mix in the effects thing, just the same where the effects are coming post. But there's something to be said. I feel that like even though I use effects loops and stuff like that, I do feel like putting delay and stuff in the loop, it can mess with the ability to get the guitar feeding back in the same way, like that immediacy of like the dry tone just being right there with the pickups with there ain't no latency. There's no added verb or sauce going on, and it just helps the guitar interact with the speaker or something. It's just more stuff.
I'm still on, but I'm going to run downstairs with my headphone in and see if I can get another set of headphones I can plug in. But
Okay.
I'm still listening.
Okay, that's cool. All right. Well, let me see if I had any other questions that I had to get to here. Somebody was asking actually about my development with the reactive load. John was working on the reactive load for a little while because it was something he was interested in, but he built me 2 prototypes into these little aluminum boxes that actually look really funny. And one of them had the switches for the resonant peak and the high rise built in, so I could switch them in and out and basically turn it into a resistive load. And it was just like fine tuning those values and stuff. And so we went back and forth a couple times, but I still have those 2 original boxes, and he would have me take them home. And some of the things I did actually, like for instance, that's on the Groomed Noodler, where it's like SL68 or sorry, SL67. Really, it was like supposed to be an SL67 demo, really, I think, but that was one of those original sort of hand-built reactive loads in this funny box you built it into, and I loaded the amp down and then went in and used some IRs. So we would listen and go back and forth, and then at one point you did it, and I just was like, man, this nails the. Gets kind of geeky, but what you want to do is load the amp down. And then listen to the amp through an IR, and then load the amp down with a cabinet that you can't hear. It's not like you're listening to the cabinet through microphones. It's in another room, isolated, but it's blasting away in another room. But you're still listening to the IR, if that makes sense. So you can compare the load tone to the cab tone, but you're not listening to the cabinet. It's just the cabinet's effect on the amplifier as far as a load goes. And so we did that. And then at one point, I remember plugging in the cab and then going to the reactive load. One of my prototypes is saying, "There's no difference. It sounds the same now. It's like exactly the same," which I still feel.
I actually did that. I did that test 2 days ago.
Yeah, it's cool, right? It's like,
yeah.
And you're like, "Oh,
I did it here with actually the low built-in ear amp." And one of the things we found is that there's a lot of U-shaped curves and the impedance curves on a lot of other loads, but we take care in trying to model all the characteristics of the speaker impedance curve, which includes this resonant peak in the lower frequencies. I don't know, somewhere around 100 hertz or 100
kind of a sharp peak.
Yeah, there's a sharp peak that goes up that a lot of loads
the resonant bump.
A lot of loads look like a hill, a soft hill.
They just like a smiley face.
Yeah, some look like a hill, but most look like a big smiley face.
Like a smiley face, right? Yeah.
And that resonant bump in the impedance curve actually goes through into the frequency response on your output. You actually get a little bit of chunk there in the low bass. And also there's a little bit of like a dip in some of those muddy frequencies of the 200 hertz.
Yep.
With that. So that's something that doesn't happen when you don't have that resonance curve and that impedance curve. So and also we also found in that test that I did a few days ago doing what you did, because I did the cat 4x12 I have here. I did the reactive load IR that was in the PT15 IR, and then I did a another brand's just U-shaped kind of curve load. Mm-hmm. And I also found that the U-shaped curve gave you more content below 80 hertz or below like 50 hertz, kind of more the stuff that you don't hear. And it didn't match with the actual cabinet, where ours in the low frequencies really followed the curve of the cabinet. So I think those things are important, just really trying to match the actual speaker impedance and all its characteristics really affects not only the frequency of the frequency response, but as you could say, the feel of it too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is my level okay after switching?
Better.
Yeah, good.
Actually.
Okay.
Superior. The old headphones are better.
I think he's using his Mac or his laptop speaker or microphone, right?
Oh. No.
Before.
No, I was using my old AirPods. But the other thing too is that, like Kevin and I were talking, is that, okay, well, why can't you just match EQ it, or why can't you just fix it? Well, I think you can to a point, but I think that the way the amp feels is something that nobody's ever going to capture on YouTube or in a sound clip or the audience. And so ideally, if you're that kind of musician who can play just as well, no matter what the response or feedback is from your gear or your instrument or your setup, if you're that kind of guy that can just bulldog your way through it, then cool, you're probably just fine. But there is a response that you don't get when the amp's not being loaded how it expects to be loaded. So I think that the feel difference is big. It's like, Pete, you did that years ago where you would send me the Badger and you would just use Match EQ. I mean, it was, how many years ago was that? Maybe 10 or something. But you were like, oh, check out this new thing, Match EQ. I can make the Badger sound like Heartbreaker, or I can make it sound like any of these things. I think you were using a resistive load. Or maybe you're just using it into the cabinet and altering it. But I'm sure that, you can attest that when you run your amp into a resistive load, besides it not sounding right, which could be EQ'd back, it doesn't feel right. And that's something only the player is going to know.
Well, there's the feel thing, the sound thing, and then also the one thing we got to consider is reliability, and that's a little bit of a great unknown sometimes. But making the amp think that it's plugged into a cabinet because that's what it's supposed to be plugged into, and then if the impedance curve looks radically different, I would just worry that the reliability of the amp could possibly, right? I mean, it's a bit of an intangible, but
it's a big unknown. I mean, a lot of people have heard about flyback voltages, and you start having impedance curves that go above 200 ohms. That's kind of borderline unloaded, and you're starting to, if you take a plexi, it's like I told you I think I told Andy Wood this the other day, I would not go plug in a vintage plexi dimed into an impedance curve that goes above 200 ohms. And he goes, well, why not? And I said, because that's a vintage transformer and you can't replace it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're gonna. The potential is there. You could cook something, and
so the only thing, it's a huge unknown. But just so people know, just read our warranty carefully, because as far as I'm concerned, until somebody shows me different, I'm not going to stand by I'm warning people that if you're not using a load that acts like a speaker and looks pretty much like a speaker, I'm not going to warranty the tubes. That's for sure. I mean, I had one guy using a U-shaped curve, and he blew like 4 sets of power tubes in 2 months because he was playing the amp on 100 watts dimed. Now, if you don't play it on 100 watts dimed, if you play it on low power or 50 watts or something that's nicer to the output section, but those vintage amps running at 500 volts on their plates, I mean, they're already on the hairy edge of getting toasted. I mean, if you unplug your speaker from a Marshall Plexi and you start playing 2 minutes of power chords, it's gone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I roasted I had a fuzz pedal plugged into my old 72 JMP back there because I was going to do a demo for a fuzz pedal, and it wasn't plugged into a load. And I hit one chord. I hit one chord and toasted the tubes. And it was a new set of tubes. I know. I was so worried, actually. And luckily, it was just tubes that I roasted because I was worried it arced a socket or something. But anyways,
but we also think it's the right way to do it. And when people say, "Well, why don't other people do it that way?" It's because of cost and size. And the other thing is that when you do it the right way of having an actual resonant, see, it starts off low. So I got to go backwards here because I'm looking at it backwards. But it goes like this, and then it kind of goes back up again. But if you don't, it comes back down. So.
Comes back down.
Yeah, whereas the U-shaped ones will just go. They'll try and capture that bass by going like this, But
yeah, and going, you can't see your other finger. But basically, you're saying the amp's unloaded way down low.
Well, 200 ohms is not unloaded, but it's not what a speaker in a cabinet would present to the amp. So if you've got an IR, the biggest compliment I had is I was talking to Celestian about. Impedance curves will change also a little bit as the amplifier is being applied some serious power.
Yeah.
And when I talked to Celestian about that, I said they didn't think it was something worth chasing because they said it doesn't move that much. and I trust them. I mean, that's what they do. And they were also doing IRs at the time, and they said the bottom line, he goes, is we can't hear any difference at all using your reactive load as a load compared to the actual speaker we did the IR with. We'll just flip back and forth, and we can't tell any difference. So
yeah,
we don't think that's worth chasing. But I do think that a true impedance curve is worth chasing. But the proximity of the parts that we put in, which are usually inductors that need to be added, they're expensive. They usually have to be custom made, and the proximity of those parts to metal changes the way they react. In fact, Kevin will tell you this, that when we did the PT15 IR, we tried to use smaller inductors that had the same specs and they had the same ratings, but they were lower power, but they should have behaved just the same because we didn't need the big ones in there. We couldn't nail it. So we just went back to, so that your reactive load on the PT15 actually has the same inductors that we use in the big one. It has smaller resistors, but the same, all the other parts are the same, because that's the only way we could guarantee that your reactive load was identical in response to our big one, except for the power handling capabilities. So we definitely feel that if we're ever going to develop a power amp, we're not going to change our reactive load, because we know that our curves work great for IR use, which is really what I designed it for, is to not be able to tell the difference.
Right.
But if we ever do a power amp, we're going to make sure that the reactive load behaves well with the power amp, instead of changing, like, a lot of switches on a lot of these reactive loads out there. People think they're changing curves. They're not changing curves. They're reducing the curves. So, and we put something similar on a reactive load too. So you could say our reactive load, the reactive load IR, you could say that has a second curve, which is really a high cut in the curve, so that when you're using a tube amp to reamplify, it will be, it'll be more the way it should be,
Right, because the tube amp's going to apply its own, a little bit of its own, so it just allows you to tune it a little bit.
But ideally, if I'm going to use a reamplifier, my goal would be to find an amplifier that works well with a great load.
Lauren's asking, he said, is there a best choice of ohm load for 8 or 16? I mean, the best ultimately would be to match your amplifier output, but you are okay with a one-way mismatch, right?
Well, if he's talking about a mismatch, or if he's asking me if different impedance caps sound different, they're two different things, sort of. But
you just said, is there a best choice of ohm load for 8 or 16?
Well, to me, that sounds like a blanket statement, which not necessarily talking about the reactive load. And there are people who feel that different loads sound different. I've never sat down and analyzed whether it's the speaker, because if you've got a 16 ohm cabinet from Marshall, you've got 4 16 ohm speakers wired in series parallel. If you could also take those 4 16 ohm speakers and you could wire them into 4 ohms. So when you're listening to your Marshall set on 4 ohms or 16 ohms, which one sounds better? Yeah, I never gave it that much thought, but like, I know Steve Stevens used to prefer a 16 ohm load. I think he said that it sounded a little more rock and roll, a little bit more hairy. Scott Henderson swears by 8 ohm. He will not use anything but 8 ohm. And I think Landau prefers 8 ohm too. So I think the most important thing first is to make sure that you're matching if you can. If you have no choice but to use a speaker that is a higher impedance than the tap, I don't find any issue with that. In fact, I have never seen an amplifier blow from a mismatch one direction or the other by one number. So if you've got an 8 ohm load, it would not give me heartburn to see a 4 ohm tap, to the 8 ohm load on 4 ohms.
Right.
It would also not give me heartburn to see a 16 ohm tap on and use an 8 ohm load. I wouldn't go much more than that. I think back in the day, Eddie used to use a 30. Did he use 32 ohms?
20 or 30, I think, with the amp set for 8.
Yeah.
And it's got a sound. It's kind of like, doesn't it? I mean, it adds a little bit of like an open thing, but that's
because he was using a resistor.
Resistive load, right?
Yeah. So one of the things you lose when you use a resistive load is, besides what Kevin was talking about, which is the resonant bump.
Yeah.
it'll start off like at 8 ohms, and then like around whatever the combined effect of the cabinet and the natural resonant peak of the speaker is, because the cabinet is going to shift the resonant peak of the speaker. So, but whatever that combined response is, if you capture that, but it might go up to 50 ohms or so, or 60 ohms. It doesn't go up to 200. But then it comes back down again very quickly in the mids, down to about 8 ohms. And then it climbs up high to maybe 50, 60 ohms when it gets up to 10K or so. And
now we're getting geeky. This is super
geeky. They're basic frequencies. And the funny thing is like, as we've shown, is if you sweep an amplifier with a resistive load, it's going to look relatively flat on your oscilloscope or your sweep, whatever you're using. If you put a speaker on that amplifier, you're going to see the bump kind of superimposed, not as dramatic, but it's going to be, that bump is going to be there in that 100 hertz area, which is key for us players. And it's going to climb at the high end. And so when it climbs at the high end, that's where you're going to, you actually hear more highs as the impedance curve climbs. And so when you've got a resistive load, it's flat. So when somebody takes a 16 ohm load, puts it in an 8 ohm speaker, at least they're getting a little bit of that high end back.
That's what you get, right? You get the, so this is the thing. If you plug a 16 ohm, amp set for 16 ohms into a 16 ohm load resistor, resistive load, it's a flat line and it sounds MIDI and kind of compressed. It doesn't
resistive load, it's going to sound flat.
But if you plug an amp set at 8 ohms into a 30 ohm load resistor, 20 ohm load resistor, you do get a bit more of that clarity.
It's going to sound better, but
it's going to sound pretty good on a Plexi, actually.
Yeah, but at that point, the amp is not being loaded correctly at any frequency.
Interesting.
So you are asking for some potential flyback voltages inside your transformer, and the problem is if that transformer cannot handle the voltage of those flyback voltages, they are going to start arcing inside your transformer, and they're going to take your transformer out.
And this is when you hear back in the day about people trying things, and then, the amps used to blow all the time. And it's like, people were doing crazy stuff, right?
Yeah, you know what happened to me is when I was a kid is I would always be playing 100 watt Marshalls at 8. That's why I still have tinnitus. But
great tone.
We were loud, and I played a Les Paul Jr. through a 100 watt Marshall at 8. And into one cabinet, and those cabinets, what were they, Pete? 20 watt speakers. I mean, it was borderline safe. And so what would happen to me is I would pop one speaker, and when you pop one speaker, the whole thing goes down. Your amp's got no load, and bam, you just popped a tube or a transformer.
Right, just like that. So it's everything getting stressed to the max. I better get a couple questions in from folks. Vincent was asking about any he was up there in the top chat. Thanks everybody for doing the super chat thing. I appreciate it. Vincent was asking about he's in lockdown like we all are, any guitar repair tips that way if you're going through your guitars and kind of working on things while you have time. Don't you guys have a few videos online about? Is there some videos on?
I think that's a work in progress. We used to years ago, but our website got
it's been kind of getting revamped over time.
It became more Apple at a time and less informative. We're trying to get back to the more informative. But there's some simple things I could tell you, but
be a great thing to make a video of, actually. Doing a simple guitar setup.
There's a basic thing that you do. Basically, you check. The first thing you do is check your nut height, make sure it's good. And I can tell people how to do that. I've talked about it before, but it's not complicated. And I use my strings as straight edge to see how straight my neck is.
Right. So holding like the G at the first and the.
Yeah, the first and is basically what you want is. God, I hate this monitor. But
grab a guitar.
I always do it on my bass string, on my low E string, because I think it's the easiest to see.
The low E?
Yeah, I always do it in low. I don't go that high. I probably go where the neck meets the body, because after the neck meets the body, there's not much you can do about it.
So you hold with your thumb kind of right, and then your first finger at the first fret, and then you look at how you push the string down, right?
I stretch my index finger as far as I can to try and get to the middle of that length. And what I'm looking for is a gap maybe half the width of your high E string, which is about 5 thousandths.
Just the smallest amount of relief.
You gotta have something. How straight it is up to you, but you have to have something.
Are we back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just saying that you have to have something.
Just a little bit of relief.
Right? It can be almost nothing, but there has to be something, or you're going to start buzzing at the first few frets.
And that's about how I set mine, just for.
But the other thing you do is I take my thumb and put it on your G on the low E.
Okay.
But you want to be able to tap, use the other hand. So you want to be able to look at the distance in between the first fret and the string while you're holding down.
Yeah. So checking the nut.
Yeah.
To make sure there's a little clearance there.
You got to have this. Again, you've got to have something, because if you've got nothing, that means that the nut is lower than the first fret.
Yeah. That's cool. I didn't even know that one.
That's amazing. That's the first thing I do. And the other thing you do is you lift the string straight out of the nut slot to make. You can't do that on the low E usually, but you can do it on the G, the D. Make sure the string's not sticking, and make sure you don't feel any grab at all.
Okay. So once you do that and get it strung up and stuff, I know you're a fan of not overstretching strings, first of all, right?
A brilliant guy who actually makes the Skyway bridge, and he and I had a lot of discussions about springs and strings and things like that. And he just kind of explained, and he's dead right, that a string is a linear spring. So if you sit there and yank on it and pull it, it's like stretching a rubber band until it doesn't stretch anymore. So you don't really want to lose all the elasticity of the string. It's going to change the way it vibrates. It's going to go dead quick. It might not return to pitch as nicely. So I like to stretch strings only as much as I think I'm going to stretch them during my natural playing.
Okay. Yeah, so you don't go too far. You'll work on it and spend time just going as far as maybe a minor third up stretching, right?
Yeah. My other big tip is when I do intonation, I like to leave the nut out of the picture, because there's always a chance that the angle in the nut slot is not correct. So I will usually play, like in the low E string, I'll play a G to a G, and I'll do my intonation in between those, and then I'll go back and check the open string and make sure that they're still intonated correctly.
And if it's not, it's a nut problem,
right? Right, and if the nut is cut low enough, you shouldn't have any need for adjustments in the nut placement. I used the BuzzFeaton for a long time, but in the end, I found out that it was fret slotting a guitar on a CNC instead of a gang slotter. I appreciate the accuracy of that, and that's what I was hearing more than anything else. So I am a big proponent of CNCing fret slots one at a time with one saw blade instead of a gang saw slotter, which not many people do. Most of us small guys do it that way, but I think that's the way to go. You've got perfect, our machines are designed to cut engine blocks, so they're extremely accurate.
Buckshot Jenkins is up there in the super chat, and he says, "Thank you for defeating string trees." I agree. I don't like them either. They are unacceptable, especially with trims. Any chance other models besides the modern would ever get a satin run 22 frets, please? Love the look and the feel. That's interesting.
Well, I'll start off with a string tree. A string tree has a disadvantage and an advantage. If you've got a Tele guitar and you think that the high E string and the B string feel a little tight, go ahead and add a string tree. What it's going to do is it's going to effectively shorten your string length a little bit, so you've got less string effectively to pull through when you're bending strings. So a string tree can make the strings feel looser, I should say no string tree can make the E and the B feel a little tighter. But for me, it's a no-brainer when it comes to the benefit of better tuning stability when using a tremolo.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like one reason we can get away with it too, besides the staggered gears, is our headstock is about 50 thousandths further away from the fingerboard than it would be on a traditional California classic. So it's a little bit so we have a little bit more down pressure over the nut anyway. So you probably couldn't take a Fender and remove the string tree all that easily without getting extremely particular and careful on how the nut slot is cut. Because if it's too tight, it's going to pinch and go out of tune. If it's too loose, it's going to ring. So there's always that fuzzy area. And what was the second part?
He was asking if you'd ever do a satin run on guitars besides the moderns. He likes that finish on a 22 fret, like maybe on a standard, do a satin.
Yeah, especially on a custom order, you can order anything you want.
That's true.
A lot of people, we need to rebuild that part of our website, and we're working on it. But again, it's like, there's a lot of things to do all at the same time. And, but people forget that we make custom instruments is primarily what we do. The guitars you see in stores just happen to be what the stores order or what customers are ordering or what we think is selling the most. But you can, there's a big range of custom orders that we can do.
Yeah, you could spec out a satin finish classic or a satin finish standard.
Yeah, just about anything you want. Just no transparent colors on roasted bodies.
Because it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
Zazu Zonker was up there in the super chat. He said, and this is the whole can of worms, but he said, John, can you explain why wood affects tone on guitars?
It's like, why is the sky blue? I mean, look at it this way. Would you expect a guitar made out of concrete to sound different than one made out of rubber? I'll tell you why. Because the argument is with electric guitars is it doesn't matter. It's the pickups. That's the argument I always hear. I disagree. If you can't now, the big problem I think is that a lot of shit that you hear on YouTube or audio files really does not tell you the whole picture. And if you're playing for the audience and that's all you're playing for, then it might not matter. But if you're playing for yourself, you want to hear certain things that help you play, and you want the correct feedback to come out of the guitar. So whatever those strings are sitting on is going to affect their vibration, which is in turn going to be picked up by the pickup in the way the string vibrates. I mean, obviously, if you put a piece of string in between two pieces of sponge compared to two pieces of steel, it's going to vibrate differently.
Right.
I mean, anything you do to the string, you're making it vibrate differently. So why wouldn't the wood change it as well?
Excellent. Resurrectionists make the point. He said, whatever did we do pre-1985? IR this and IR that. Yeah, I know. But the whole thing is, pre-1985, it was really difficult to record.
You had studios.
Yeah, you had studios up and running and like a vibrant studio industry. Now
and all over the place.
And you had budgets because there was record companies with money.
And you had to play your ass off because you couldn't overtrack. I mean, the guy's right. And this might be part of my gripe about why things aren't the same anymore is because, now, shit, if I wanted to write a song, I could attempt and write the song because I know I can cut and splice and do as much as I want, and I can manipulate. I can change my IRs on the fly. We might be making more technically better sounding music than we did back then, but it doesn't, I think there's something lacking in the originality when you actually have to sit down and learn a song from beginning to end. And you have to be, I mean, it blows me away. Like, David Grissom is, I always liked his playing.
Yeah.
But, the tone he has is kind of like a dark, kind of like early Gibbons tone, which is a great tone, but I tend to go for more clarity in my tones. And then he's got a song called Belly of the Beast. And when I first heard that song, I was like, good God, that is just the tone, that's just the holy grail Strat ripping blues tone. If nobody's heard that tone, look up Belly of the Beast by David Grissom. But funny enough, it doesn't sound like much of his other stuff. So I found him on Messenger, and I was just hoping he would answer me because I just wanted to know what he used.
Yeah. It's
a 20-watt Marshall and a Strat. Nothing else. And he did it in 2 takes.
Amazing.
I mean, it's like that's the way it used to be. And when you used to have to learn the song and you'd have to be right on. I mean, Lukather and those guys, they used to walk into studios and rip it up in 15, 20 minutes and they're out of there.
Yeah, it's true. But they had the studio to do it in. They could play loud and turn it up, and they had the ability. So, all this stuff, IRs and everything, I get the point for sure. Like the good old days and stuff. And I grew up, when I first started working in studios, I mean, the first record I recorded was 24-track analog. And, the machine I learned how to record on was an analog machine and stuff. And there was no IRs. And, I mean, I think the Sans amp had come out. I had a Rockman when I was a kid, but
they sound like ass.
Yeah, I mean, what we're trying to do now with this stuff is, to some degree, we're just chasing that moving target and making it, once again, like tubes, making it sound as good as tubes. Well, we're trying to make IR and the reactive load, make these things usable. Because I know we did things different in '85, but just the fact that I can take my PT-15 now to a session and plug in direct and get a tone in 5 minutes, or get a tone in 5 minutes while recording, in an apartment, or take it to a gig and plug it right into a PA and get a killer tone. It's like we're just trying to make a better mousetrap. And I know sometimes we can go down these technical roads and it seems like it's complicated. That's for sure. You've got to strike the balance. I agree.
Well, it's the same reason people use modelers instead of tube amps. I don't believe that anybody, well, I'm sure there's guys out there who are so comfortable with their modelers that they get a better tone out of that than a shitty amp. Yeah, of course. But if you've got a great modeler and a great amp, I don't know if anyone would ever say that the modeler is creating an iconic tone. It's kind of copying an iconic tone. So
yeah.
Back in the 80s, when I had my Tascam Porta Studio, and funny enough, Kevin just bought one. When I had my Tascam Porta Studio with the cassettes that ran at high speed and shit, it didn't sound that great. I mean, sure, you could sell a song to have it done later, but these days you can, on a laptop, you can just about make a high quality recording that sounds amazing. We never had that as a kid. I mean, I wish we did, but
yeah,
I think this, just like anything else, people tend to go overboard with things. They get a rack and they turn everything up. So
yeah. Oh, you just reminded me of a question and I'm sorry, I hope the guy's still here. He asked a question a little while ago about effects. I just want to get this in really quick. He was saying, and you're kind of going through this right now, John, because you're actually building a pedal board, but he was saying things like the H9 Strymon pedals, all these new pedals people are using. How do you feel about the quality of them compared to H3000s and PCM 41s and 42s and the stuff back in the day, the older rack effects that were really high end for the time?
Well, I think the old gear has a sound, and Kevin could probably tell you why. And I'll tell you, I never had a rig that sounded so glorious as my Bradshaw rig, but it cost me $500 in cartridge to move it. So, yeah. What do you want? It's like, how important is it to get everything? I mean, Pete, you can tell the story. I went to see you with Don Henley, right?
Yeah.
And you had a full glorious stereo rig. But in the end, I couldn't hear you very well because it was just kind of like the wrong rig for the gig.
You made me rethink my rig because I trust you so much.
Well, I think I recorded it too on at least my iPhone.
Yeah, and it was partially an issue with what was going on at front of house at the time. But you made me think about Stuart's rig. He's an amazing guitar player, first of all. So he's got all this. He's the other guitar player in Don's band, plays in the Eagles as well. But he uses a PV Classic 50 with some Boss pedals and a red snapper, Menatone red snapper. That's it. I mean, he's got 5 pedals on his board and a Classic 50 and some beautiful guitars. But it's like the nature of his rig. It was a small rig, kind of mid-centric, focused, and
had
cut
space
and cut through. Yeah, in a band with 2 keyboard players and 2 guitar players and background singers and lots going on. And I had a full wet, dry, wet, 3 mics, the whole 9 yards. And it really made me think about the picking, the right rig for the gig. That's a great way to go with, if you're Steve Stevens or Eddie Van Halen, maybe where you're the guitar player in the band and your guitar lives it's a big stereo, but if you're a guy that needs to cut
space.
Yeah. Sometimes, the smaller amp and just mono and stuff is a good thing. So.
Kevin is more into the analog stuff than I am, funny enough. Mm-hmm. So he could probably tell you what he hears and why he hears what he hears. Because, to me, the gear is better, but that doesn't mean the sounds are better. Sometimes I think less is more. But you could also look at Lukather and Landau. Both had similar Bradshaw rigs. They all had the same shit, but they sound entirely different. So
yeah, sure.
In the end, it's about what you're turning on and how you're using it. Those effects are tools. I do think that my Bradshaw rig was easier to use than a modeler.
Well, there was a beauty to the way Bradshaw did things back in the day, right? Where you had the instant access switches were all right. It was so easy, right? Like,
everything was easy.
But convenience has kind of been, and part of convenience is small, so it gets smaller and smaller. I mean, we think about something like an HX Stump. It's an incredible piece of gear that's this big, but you got to get through the menus because there's no other way to do it on something that small. A Bradshaw pedal board, when you look back in the day, there's a million switches. It was like, oh, that looks complicated. Actually, it was simple. There was just a switch for every single piece of gear, and you could easily get to it. You don't have to page through on some of the new, like be it an ES8 or my switcher, I've got to hit a couple button pushes before I can get to certain things because you got to get to different levels of menu because you've only got 16 switches or whatever. Bradshaw,
I just want treble.
Yeah.
Where's my treble?
Totally.
That's the thing I found when I was playing with more analog gear is the availability of the controls with your hands is just something that you kind of take for granted. When I grew up playing on digital stuff, I grew up mostly playing through the Axe-Fx, and I think it's a great piece of gear. I think it has great effects in it. But I would spend hours tweaking all the little variables and all the amp presets and like the sag and stuff I didn't even know what it meant at the time. Going for a sound that I heard on an album somewhere, and I created something that sounded cool, but then I listened back to it later and I was like, that doesn't sound like any real amp now. It kind of sounds a little weird. I maybe EQ'd it too much, or I had no reference of what, something was. But then my dad brought like one of our amps home and there's only like 6 controls. And I just plugged it in and I just dialed it really quick. And then it sounded like something that, you wanted. And it's even same thing, my dad says he doesn't like the Porta Studio as much. But I think one of the things with digital recordings now is people don't have the typical environment that you would get in an analog recording situation where you'd have like maybe a desk with EQs built into it that have certain EQ circuits. Or when you think about the Neve EQs, they're already kind of dialed in certain frequencies and they already sound good, and you can kind of just easily with your fingers dial something to sound pretty good right away.
Yeah.
Where if you open up a fresh Logic project, they have some vintage EQs in there, but you're gonna have to put it on every track, and you have to go there with your mouse and choose the one thing and like kind of move the frequency band with your mouse and move the gain with your mouse. And it's not the quick like experience you get when you have the knobs in front of you and you have all this stuff in front of you.
Well, and everything you're designing and working on, because I know things you're working on now and stuff that where you're trying to marry, and this was the PT15 and you were a huge part, massive part of the development of that. The beauty of marrying simplicity with a bit of this digital tech. This is the other thing I want to say about the guy that did the review of the PT15, because I'm going to nail him on this right now because it's not fucking fair. He said, something about me and Pete Thorn. I didn't buy the amp to review it, certainly because of him, because I remember when he was telling us the Axe-Fx was the greatest thing. And that really pissed me off. And the reason is because I still think the Axe-Fx is a great piece of gear. I have an FM3 on my desk right here beside me, and there's an Axe-Fx 3 within reach of my right hand and left hand. I have the latest Axe-Fx units right now. I think they're awesome. They're incredible pieces of gear, and I never told you that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I don't like tube amps because I've been a tube amp fan my whole life. And what I wish he would have recognized is that in the PT15, we were marrying the two worlds together in one easy-to-use unit. I can walk and chew gum at the same time. I can appreciate modelers, and I can love tube amps and the tones that I'm never going to lose that.
Yeah,
so
I still have my Helix.
And what's that? You still have your Helix?
My Helix.
I have I've used Axe-Fx on tour last year, and there's nothing wrong with they're great units. So it's like with the PT, that's just what we wanted to give, that you want more gain, reach out and turn the knob. You want more treble, and it's tubes and it distorts and sings and does all the stuff you would expect. But there's this one digital component that's very easy to use, not overwhelming, that is going to give you all this flexibility along with the reactive load that Kevin so brilliantly engineered into a smaller package and slipped it inside the amp. So
yeah, I think
trying to put it all together.
The PT15 IR is still a tube amp with a tube power section and an output transformer. It has all the stuff a tube amp has. It has a load. The only thing that's digital is not any of the actual circuitry. It's just the cabinet at the end. And that's also bypassable with just an analog bypass. So you can get a straight analog DI out of it. But the thing that I still think digital is amazing for is things like impulse responses in EQs. There's a lot of argument whether it could accurately create the sonics of a tube or the distortion of a tube or vice, all that stuff. But in terms of reverbs, delays, and EQs, it's amazing at. And that's all we did was we added that very strong point that DSP is very good at is IRs and capturing what a speaker does. Because otherwise it's hard for people to record in their room without some sort of setup. I mean, I used to record in this room all the time trying to do my metal stuff, and I would try and stick up an SM57 to my 4x12, and I never could play as loud as I wanted to. And I'm sure I would piss off everyone in the house if they heard me playing metal all day. And I tried it, and I wasn't able to get a very good tone. I just didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have the room for it.
That experience that you had, though, I think John can say he had the experience in the 70s, right, John?
Yeah,
I mean, like the first time you tried to mic, right?
Oh, well, you're miking. I lived in, living in an apartment in Brooklyn. What the hell are you going to do?
Well, and I remember you telling me even in the studio, you're like, that doesn't sound like my amp when you heard a mic for the first time. So we're trying to give people the optimized mic position and everything, right? Like, so that you can.
My joke on that is the first time I went into a huge digital, modern studio, like record plant style, we went in there and we had to record, and the engineer was this guy named, the producer was this guy named Jimmy Malin, who was a famous percussionist, and I think he played on some of the Rolling Stones stuff. Really nice guy, and he brought us into the studio, and we could not. We had, I think it was a 16-track tape that we had in our studio. My drummer was blessed; he had an amazing studio on Bleecker and Broadway, which was unheard of. But he owned the 6th floor of this building, and so he had the whole place soundproofed and everything. But the bottom line is we went to the studio and we couldn't get my guitars to sound as good as we got them to sound on tape, and because this was a digital studio. But finally we got things to sound pretty good, and I had my Bradshaw rig with 2 4x12s, H&H power amp, and huge room to record in, like all wood everywhere, all nicely, sound treated. I mean, you could have an orchestra in there. So I just had a field day. So they just said, well, here's 6 mics, go put them on your amp.
Right.
Because I didn't like it when they just put the mics on my cabinets. I didn't like it. And it was my ignorance, because it just didn't sound round and full. It sounded too direct and in my face. Yeah. So I went out there and I put the mics everywhere in the studio. I got it to sound amazing if that's the only thing you listen to.
Right.
But then, I ignored the fact that I was a guitar player in the band, and the keyboard player had like a rack of like 6 keyboard modules. So when he hit one chord, it was like a wall of sound. So there wasn't very much space. So what I learned, and I think it's the same thing that happened to you with Henley, is that you take up so much space that you're going to get turned down in the mix.
Yeah.
And then when you get turned down, and I think it's I think it's what happened to Lukather over the years too. It's like, I love Lukather's guitar playing. It's like, especially the stuff he did with the tubes just blew me away. Like Talk to You Later and She's a Beauty, some wicked guitar playing and great tones, but it was very focused. And this is what I didn't understand. So by the time, of course, we were paying a lot of money for the studio. So of course I don't get to go back in and redo my tracks, but in the end, all my effects were printed. All my reverbs, my delays were printed.
Yeah.
My sound was monstrous, and it sounded like a huge room, because I walked around and kind of like said, well, this is where it sounds good. That's where I'm going to put the mic. I put the mic right there.
Right.
And in the end, I sounded like a box of bees, because I had too much going on and too many delays and too much reverb. I got lost in the mix.
Well, it's a thing that, like, I mean, on a video I put out this week for the Steve Vai, Jose Marshall, you know, somebody mentioned in the comments I saw, they said that amp didn't sound like, I didn't like the way Pete recorded it. It sounded better in the shop when Dave was playing it. Well, he liked the tone of the camera mic.
Right. Exactly.
Back 15 feet from the amp in the, and I understand that because it's not the upfront focused, but if you're used to micing an amplifier in the studio, you take anybody's going to tell you, you take that 12-inch speaker and where the cap is in the center, you move the 57 off from the cap and there's the sweet spot, right? And you can angle it a little bit, but there's that variation on that theme has been the same way we've been recording guitars on records since the 1960s. So, you know, basically it's like, that's what you do to get that sound that sounds like that on a record. And if you're, you know, if it's all room mics and stuff back and then try and compete once the bass and the cymbals and the singer kicks in and stuff, and it's just going to be washed out. Player. Yeah. The damn keyboard players. They're
it's the hard lesson everyone has to learn.
Yeah. And then the bass player says, dude, you're stepping all over my bass. You know?
That's right. Yeah. Having your zone, like when you think about the guitar tone on Satisfaction or something, it's probably sounds unbelievably ratty by itself. But you put the bass in with it, and
I'm a huge old Montrose fan. That you know, people ask what I started playing with. It was bands like, you know, I was learning Montrose, you know, and things like that. Yeah. And I remember what's that app that came out that's no longer available?
Oh, Jam It.
Yeah, you could buy the track and then you could turn down, you could solo out the guitar. And I did the same thing with Richie Blackmore. I'm a big Richie Blackmore, like, you know, Deep Purple and rock. I still listen to it.
Yeah.
But I took one of those tunes and I turned down everything except Richie Blackmore. And you're going, are you kidding me? You know, that's his tone. Like it sounds like he's running through a tape deck. It's spitting at you. It's like every note's like, puh, you know? And you hear him drop notes too, but then you turn up everybody else. It sounds amazing.
It's a vibe.
And it's the same thing with those old Montrose records. If you listen to only Montrose, it sounds terrible. But in the tune, it's perfect.
Yeah, bass tones. I mean, like Chris Squire was probably the other one you notice on Jam It, where you turn it up and you listen to Roundabout or something, and it's like it's like all this fret buzz, but in the track, it's like, that sounds amazing. It's
the bass part on Rosanna, he's running through a chorus.
Right.
It sounds so weird, but when you listen to the track, it's perfect.
It's like, oh yeah, totally. Couple more. We've been going almost 3 hours, you guys. So Justin's texting me saying maybe we should wrap it up.
Do we take care of everybody who's got the orange questions and stuff?
Vinicius Rosa said, I don't know if he had a question, but he said thank you. And I think, or maybe he did have a question, but I'm missing it now. I'll take a look in a second. Somebody was asking, lifelong fan was saying, we got a PT50 and a PT100, but no PT50. Why is that? Well, the 50 would be the next thing that when we're working on something that, once again, we talked a little bit earlier, this is the R&D team. So it's like, there's only so much you can do.
I feel like Kevin needs to talk more. I need to get him to talk more.
Yeah. Kevin, why no PT50?
Geez. I mean,
oh, that's dad.
Can you help me figure out how to clone myself and my dad? And
that's all it is.
We can add. Yeah, it's only so much time in the day.
You know, I think Kevin's heart seems to be into analog signal path and effects and digital control over that. So I think I'm really excited. In case I never told him, Kevin, I am so excited that you're into this. But you know, I did kind of push him a little bit into electronics and to give him things that he could get excited about, because I could tell he was a kid with too much time on his hands. So, you know, I really think that he's developed the bug, and I think it's also kind of cool. I mean, even back when he was playing with his computer or listening to music, I think I don't know how old you were. I don't think you could have been more than 13 or something, and you were listening to Return of the Giant Hogweed by Genesis, and I'm going, oh, Return of the Giant Hogweed, and he's like, you know that song? I think I kind of ruined it for him, but I'm really excited that he's into this world, and where I stop is where he continues. So like with Pete's amp, Kevin did everything on that amp, really. The only thing I said is this is the circuitry as I think it should be. So start designing it, because it was similar to your PT100. But so I said, this is where I'd like to start it. And so Kevin just did all the work, and it was a huge experience. But like, the things with the IR, as I said, well, can we assign an IR per channel? Because that would be kind of cool to have a different clean IR than, like you say, you don't necessarily like clean channels into G12M greenbacks or whatever.
Right.
So you can change that, at least in your IR. So I think from Kevin, funny enough, the lockdown Kevin's gotten a lot done during the lockdown. So we're all excited about this coming year, about new products. Kevin, everybody's going to see some new products from us, whether it be at NAM, if there is a NAM, or whether it be virtual NAM.
Virtual NAM.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but cool stuff, we are working on a lot of new products, and I think it's going to be a real exciting year coming up.
Yeah. I think every year I learn more and more, and it gives us more ideas on new products. And it was like with the MIDI thing at the time. A couple of years ago, I wouldn't be able to do the MIDI, and now I've got learning the MIDI stuff, and there's that expands what products can do in terms of controlling with rigs and stuff. So every year, it's like I learn a lot more, and it just it opens the doors for a lot more possibilities. And yeah, there's so many things that we could make, and there's so many things we want to make.
And reach out to your dealers and tell them you'd love us to make X.
It comes down to the timing and the complications of certain things. Sometimes something like an attenuator, something I don't really have too much experience with, might take me longer than something I've been playing with more recently. So if it's something like that, then I'll have to spend more time doing the research and the R&D for doing that correctly, and experimenting and comparing with other units and making sure we do the best one.
Yeah, if we can't top what we feel is out there, we probably won't bother. So like I still think, and that's the reason we did the reactive load, because there wasn't a reactive load that followed a true impedance curve. And I think to this day, I think Pete's amp is the only amp out there that has a true impedance curve on their load built into the amp.
And probably only one of two or three that are even made, right?
Yeah.
And have a load. So
yeah.
I got to grab a couple more questions here, guys, really quick. Lifelong fan said, thanks for answering my question. Thanks, man, up there in the top chat. Vinicus, or I never know if it's Vinicius or Vinicus Rosa. His question was that he's got a Marshall 1959 that he was running into load. He says reactive load, and he's had 2 output transformers go on him. And you say, shouldn't I have dimed it? Or is it the Marshall's poor quality output transformer the reason why this happened? I think if it's a stock SLP, they're kind of known for not being the most robust output transformer. Isn't that right?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it has more to do with the construction, because when we make reproductions, we rarely have an issue. But I'd have to ask him, what was the reactive load?
I think it's yours.
Well, and he's had what happen?
He's had a couple output transformers go on him. But I think on those SLPs, that's a known, like cranking, they can be kind of.
Well, that's the transformer. I have never had one pop. Ever.
Yeah, we've never had a SL68, right? He's getting a Marin, he says now, Marin output transformer. So
what's that?
He's going to get a Marin output transformer for it next.
Yeah. That probably any good maker. I mean, I had a guy with one of the newer Marshalls blow 3 output transformers, and he was getting really pissed with me. And then he came to me and showed me his speaker cables, and they were horrible. So the first thing I'm going to say is, if you're having issues, look at your cables, and look at your jacks and your connections and make sure everything is good. A Marshall can have a flaky jack on the speaker jack, and that will cause the transformers to fry. Also, those impedance selectors, the ones that you pull out and plug back in, are horrible. Get rid of those. Have a good tech replace that with a newer style. If there is intermittent connection there, that is going to fry your transformer. If your amp is an old amp and it's running on 120 volts, it was designed for 115 volts, get yourself a variac, lower it down a little bit just to bring it into the safe zone, because it's running hotter than it was ever designed to run.
Yeah, so, one thing about the SL68 is I've known that, like like when you're stressing the hell out of them and the tubes, I've popped tubes and things like that, but I don't have those issues, or I'll blow a fuse, but I don't have those issues at 90 volts at the lower, and I like the tone anyway. So just keep in mind that with you're taking that amp and you're like, it's like taking a race car on a dyno or whatever those things are called, just flooring it, right? I mean, that's what you're doing essentially into a reactive load. So,
even into a speaker. When I used to use my Marshall into, running at 8 into a cabinet, I blew that amp up quite often. And tell you the truth, that's the reason I stopped using those amps, because they weren't reliable when you're out playing a gig. The bandmates don't give a shit what tone you're getting. They just want you to finish the gig.
Yep.
So even those old Marshalls into speakers blow up too. And
with an SL68, you just don't see this, right? Because you just built it right.
I've seen people pop tubes when they use U-shaped curves, but I recommend, if you're going to dime the amp, run it at the Variac setting. It's going to be nicer to the amp, because a stock Marshall cranked is exceeding a lot of the ratings that it was designed to run at. So
yeah. Okay. Well, I think we can probably, we're at exactly 2:59 and 30 seconds. We can probably wrap it up here pretty quick, because this has been a 3-hour awesome adventure into
my AirPods are dying.
Okay.
I just got that.
Did it? Okay. Oh, lost John there for a minute. Actually, everybody froze. You guys coming back? Or is it over? Can anybody still hear me out there? I'm not sure. Oh, there's John back again for a sec. Hello. Well, I wonder if you guys can still hear me. You guys hear me? Yeah, you guys can hear me, but nobody else. Maybe that's it. Maybe it was the right time to wrap it up. It's over, Johnny, says somebody. The chat's going so fast, I missed it. Well, if those guys make it back, then I can thank them properly. But this was awesome. I can't thank all you guys enough for watching this whole time. 700 to 800 people online the whole time. It was just incredible. So appreciate it, you guys.
I'm back.
Oh, John's back. There you are. I can say goodbye to you in a proper way. I thought it was over. Can you hear me? I can hear some sound on. Oh, Kevin's gone. I think his AirPods died.
Oh,
there's Kevin.
There's Kevin. There's Pete.
Okay.
And maybe we should start wrapping it up, since we're getting.
Yeah, we're gonna jet.
Snaky. Okay.
I'm gonna jet. This was great, you guys. I can't thank you enough for doing this. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, really, really terrific. So everybody, have a great rest of your Sunday, and keep sheltering in place. Stay safe, play your guitar. And
yes. Stay safe, everybody.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next Sunday.
See ya. Thanks for joining.
See ya.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye.